The wind doesn't just blow on the Baltic coast in the year of our Lord 1310, it screams. It is a living, freezing entity that claws at the timber walls of the merchant's cabin, desperate to find a crack, a seam, or a loose latch to extinguish the life flickering within. Outside, the world is a monochromatic void of slate-grey skies and jagged white ice, but inside there is a defiance of colour. On a heavy oak workbench, illuminated by the rhythmic pulse of a roaring hearth, lies the gold of the north. Dozens of raw amber stones, pulled from the churning autumn surf before the deep freeze set in, wait for the merchant's touch. When he rubs them against a scrap of coarse wool, a strange magic happens. The cold stone warms. A scent heady, ancient and resinous wafts into the air, smelling of pine forests that drowned beneath the waves 10,000 years ago. This is not just a story of a cold winter night. This is a journey into the sensory sanctuary of a man whose livelihood is built on the fossilized sunlight of a forgotten era. As the frost feathers across the lidded glass windows, we invite you to pull your chair closer to the fire, feel the phantom warmth of the hearth, smell the sweet incense of the resin, and listen to the rhythmic scrape of stone on cloth. Tonight the ice stays outside. Tonight we find the light hidden within the crust of the earth. Herman, the merchant, breathes out a cloud of white mist that quickly vanishes in the heat. His hands are calloused, stained with the oils and dust of his trade, yet they move with the precision of a surgeon. He picks up a piece of raw amber, the size of a pigeon's egg. To the untrained eye, it looks like nothing more than a dull, crusty pebble weathered by the salt and sand. But Herman knows better. He sees the fracture lines. He sees the way the firelight struggles to penetrate the opaque exterior. He begins the work. The first stage is the cleaning. He uses a small, sharp iron knife to gently scrape away the sea skin, the chalky weathered crust formed by centuries of tumbling in the brine. Each flake that falls onto the workbench is a tiny piece of history. As the crust falls away, a sliver of translucent honeygold peeks through. The sound of the knife is a rhythmic scritch, 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 a sharp contrast to the low guttural moan of the gale outside. The cabin creaks, the heavy beams groaning under the weight of the snow piling onto the thatch roof. But here, the focus is absolute. There is a profound peace in the repetition. In a world of crusades, shifting borders, and the harsh realities of medieval survival, this small circle of light is a temple of industry and calm. Herman dips a cloth into a bowl of linseed oil. The scent of the oil mingles with the wood smoke of the burning birch logs. He begins to rub the stone. This is the transition from raw element to precious gem. With every circular motion, the amber grows warmer. It begins to glow from within, catching the orange flicker of the hearth. It is as if he is waking the stone up from a long frozen sleep. As he works, his mind wanders to the journey these stones took. They were once sap, dripping from gargantuan trees in a world that knew no frost. Now, they are the prize of kings and bishops, destined for the rosaries of Rome or the jewelry boxes of the nobility in Bruges. But for now they belong only to him and the silence of the Baltic winter. The weight of the world outside, the freezing tides, the political machinations of the Teutonic Knights, the scarcity of the season, all of it fades. There is only the stone, the oil, and the fire. Every few minutes he pauses to adjust a log with a heavy iron poker. Sparks dance up the chimney like tiny stars returning to the sky. He takes a sip of warm ale, flavoured with a hint of honey and bog myrtle, feeling the liquid heat spread through his chest. He picks up another stone, larger this time, with a peculiar dark spot in its centre. He holds it up to the flame, squinting. It is a fly, perfectly preserved, its wings still spread as if caught mid-flight millions of years ago. A tiny traveller in time, finally reaching its destination in a warm cabin on a cold night. Herman smiles, a rare expression that softens the lines of his weathered face. He knows this piece is special. It is a captured moment of life, suspended in a golden tomb. The fire in the hearth shifts, a heavy birch log collapsing into a bed of glowing white coals. Herman reaches for a small iron-bound chest tucked beneath the bench. Inside, he keeps his most specialized tools, fine needles of hardened steel and leather straps impregnated with the finest silt from the riverbeds. To transform these raw nuggets into prayer beads, the paternosters so highly coveted by the wealthy guildsmen of the south, he must pierce their hearts without shattering their bodies. He selects a small handheld bow drill. The frame is made of polished ash and the string is a thin cord of braided horsehair. This is delicate work, requiring a stillness of spirit that matches the frozen world outside. He places a rounded amber bead into a wooden vise lined with soft felt. The friction of the drill will generate heat, and if he moves too fast, the amber will crack. Its internal stress is giving way like brittle ice. Slowly, the drill begins to hum. Whir, whir, whir. It is a mechanical song, a low-frequency vibration that resonates through the heavy oak of the workbench and into Hermann's very bones. A tiny plume of golden dust rises from the puncture point. The scent intensifies, sweet, spicy, and ancient. It is the smell of a sun-drenched forest from 50 million years ago, released into the 14th century winter air. As the needle-thin bit sinks deeper into the stone, Hermann holds his breath. He feels the resistance of the material, sensing the microscopic bubbles of air and water trapped within the resin. He adjusts the tension of the bow, guided not by sight, but by the tactile feedback of the wood and string. This is the mastery of the craft, knowing the limits of the gold of the north. Outside, a sudden gust of wind slams against the cabin, rattling the heavy shutters. A fine dusting of snow sifts through the chimney, hissing as it hits the hot stones of the hearth. Hermann doesn't flinch. His eyes remain fixed on the point of contact between steel and stone. With a final gentle push, the drill breaks through the other side. He releases the tension, removes the bead, and blows away the dust. A perfect, clean hole pierces the center. He holds the bead up to the light. It is a translucent cherry red, a rarer hue found only in certain pockets of the shoreline. The firelight passes through it, casting a warm, crimson orb onto the palm of his hand. It looks like a drop of blood, or perhaps the glowing ember of a dying star. He places it on a silk string and reaches for the next one. The process repeats, the cleaning, the grinding, the drilling. Each bead is a labor of time. He thinks of the monks who will eventually hold these beads in their cold cloisters, their fingers moving over the smooth surfaces as they recite their prayers. They will feel the warmth of the stone, unaware of the frozen Baltic night where it was shaped. They will feel the soul of the amber, which many in this age believe can draw out the sickness of the body and the impurities of the mind. Hermann's mind drifts to the market in the spring. He imagines the bustle of the docks, the smell of tar and salt fish, the polyglot chatter of merchants from across the sea. He will trade these beads for spices from the east, fine woolens from Flanders, and perhaps a small trinket for the daughter of the innkeeper in the village. But those thoughts are like a dream from a different life. Here in the heart of winter, the only reality is the circle of firelight and the growing weight of the golden beads in his tray. He picks up a larger piece, one that is unusually heavy and opaque. He doesn't scrape this one. Instead, he uses a piece of sharkskin, brought to him by a sailor from the North Sea, to buff the surface. The sharkskin is rough and abrasive, perfectly suited for the initial smoothing of larger decorative pieces. The sound is like the rustle of dry leaves in an autumn wind. Gradually, the opacity of the stone begins to shift. It reveals swirls of creamy white and deep orange like clouds at sunset. This is fatty amber, prized for its unique patterns. Hermann works the surface until it feels like silk beneath his fingertips. He closes his eyes for a moment, simply feeling the texture in the darkness of his closed lids. The sound of the wind becomes the sound of the primeval forest, and the heat of the fire becomes the heat of a sun that set eons before the first man ever walked these shores. The rhythmic sound of the sharkskin against the amber fills the cabin, a steady, shushing cadence that matches the merchant's breathing. Every so often he pauses to wipe the stone with a damp linen cloth, removing the fine yellow slurry that builds up during the polishing. The fire continues its slow, steady consumption of the birch logs, casting long flickering shadows that play across the bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Herman reaches for a small ceramic jar. Inside is a mixture of crushed chalk and olive oil, a secret recipe passed down through generations of artisans. He applies a dab of the white paste to a square of soft tanned deerskin. This is the stage of the final light. This is where the stone stops being a piece of earth and becomes a vessel for the sun. As he rubs the deerskin against the amber, the friction creates a low musical hum. The scent of the oil mingles with the sharp, clean smell of the resin, creating an atmosphere that feels almost sacred. The amber begins to develop a mirror-like finish. When he holds it near the hearth, he can see the reflection of the dancing flames perfectly captured on the curved surface of the stone. He thinks about the nature of amber. To the scholars in the universities of Paris, it is a mystery of the natural world. To the common folk along the coast, it is the tears of a grieving goddess or the solidified foam of a magical sea. But to Herman, it is a bridge. It is a bridge between the ancient, wild past and the structured, commercial present. It is a bridge between the freezing, inhospitable winter and the warmth of a human home. The wind outside takes on a higher pitch, a thin, whistling sound as it forces its way through the eaves. A heavy thud echoes from the roof. A large branch or a mass of frozen snow has shifted. Herman doesn't look up. He is focused on a tiny inclusion he just discovered in the fatty amber, a fragment of a prehistoric leaf, its veins still visible, trapped in a swirl of cream-colored resin. It is a miniature landscape of forest frozen in time. He sets the piece down with a sense of satisfaction. His fingers are beginning to stiffen from the cold that manages to seep through the floorboards, despite the fire. He stands up, his heavy wool cloak swishing around his legs, and walks over to the hearth. He takes the iron tongs and rearranges the logs, coaxing the hidden heat from the center of the pile. A shower of sparks erupts, swirling up the flue like a constellation of orange stars. He takes a moment to look at his reflection in a small polished bronze mirror hanging near the door. His beard is flecked with golden dust, his eyes tired but bright. In this isolated cabin he is a king in a golden counting house. The world of men, of taxes, wars, and church bells is 1,000 miles away. Here, there is only the elemental struggle of the winter and the quiet triumph of the craft. He returns to the bench, but instead of picking up a new stone, he begins to sort the finished beads. He groups them by size and color, the deep dark cognacs, the bright lemon yellows, and the rare milky whites. He strings them onto temporary chords, the clicking of the beads against one another sounding like the chatter of small birds. The weight of the full strings is substantial. They represent months of scavenging the shoreline and weeks of painstaking labor. Each bead is a small insurance policy against the hunger of the lean months. He runs the string through his fingers, feeling the smooth, consistent texture. There is no greater pleasure for a craftsman than the feel of a finished work that meets his own high standards. As the candle on his workbench flickers, nearing the end of its wick, Herman prepares to light another. He uses a small splinter of wood, igniting it from the hearth and bringing the flame to the new candle. The light swells, pushing back the encroaching shadows. He picks up a small translucent piece of amber, no bigger than a thumbnail, and decides to carve a simple shape into it, perhaps a small fish, a tribute to the sea that provided this bounty. The small iron knife in Herman's hand is sharp enough to shave a hair. With a steady breath, he begins to carve the tiny amber fish. The material is temperamental. It is not like wood, which has a grain, nor like stone, which has a crystalline structure. Amber is an amorphous solid, a frozen liquid, and it can shatter like glass if the pressure is applied unevenly. He makes a series of minute, shallow cuts, creating the curve of a tail fin and the delicate line of a gill. The shavings are so fine they look like golden hair, curling away from the blade and settling into the crevices of his skin. The firelight seems to concentrate within the small piece of amber, making it glow like a hot coal. As he works, the silence of the room is so profound that he can hear the soft snip-snip of the blade and the thud of his own heart. He thinks of the legends his grandmother used to tell, of the palace of the sea queen that sat at the bottom of the Baltic, built entirely of amber and guarded by schools of silver fish. It was said that when the queen wept for her lost love, her tears turned to gold as they hit the cold salt water, eventually washing up on the shore for lucky men to find. Herman doesn't know if he believes in sea queens, but he knows that there is a soul in the stone. You cannot work with something this old, this beautiful, without feeling a sense of reverence. The carving takes shape. The little fish seems to swim in the palm of his hand, its body catching the light from the hearth. He uses a fine needle to etch the scales, 100 tiny overlapping arcs that give the piece texture and life. This is not for a merchant or a nobleman. This is a gift for his soul, a way to pass the deepest hours of the winter night when the loneliness of the dunes feels most heavy. He pauses to rub the carving against his wool sleeve. The friction generates that familiar, comforting scent, and the fish begins to shine. He holds it up to the frost-covered window. Even through the thick, white ice on the glass, the amber finds its way to the moonlight outside. The world out there is a graveyard of blue shadows and lethal cold, but inside his palm he holds a tiny spark of life. The merchant looks at the pile of raw stones remaining. There is enough work here to last until the first thaw, until the day the ice in the bay finally cracks with the sound of 1,000 drums and the first cormorants return to the cliffs. Until then he is content. He pours the last of the ale into his mug, the liquid dark and rich, and watches the steam rise into the resin-scented air. He begins to prepare his workspace for the next task. He wipes the table clean of dust, saving every grain in a small leather pouch. He sharpens his knives on a whetstone, the metallic shing-shing sound a sharp, clean counterpoint to the organic rustle of the amber. Everything in the cabin has its place. Everything has its purpose. In the chaos of the medieval world, this order is his greatest luxury. He leans back, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face and the chill of the Baltic on his back. It is a balance of extremes, a life lived on the edge of the world, but as long as the hearth is fed and the amber remains, he is the richest man on the coast. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythmic sound of the wind lull him into a light doze, the golden fish still clutched safely in his calloused hand. Herman wakes with a start as a heavy log rolls forward in the hearth, sending a brilliant spray of sparks against the soot-blackened stones. The fire has settled into a deep, pulsing crimson, the kind of heat that sinks into the marrow. He sits upright, the small amber fish still warm in his palm. The night is at its deepest point, the hour when the spirits of the old world are said to wander the frozen dunes. But Herman is a man of craft and commerce. His ghosts are the inclusions trapped in resin and the memories of seasons past. He reaches for a bowl of water and drops the finished beads into it. The gold of the north has a peculiar quality. It floats in salt water but sinks in fresh. He adds a handful of coarse sea salt to the bowl, watching as the beads bob to the surface like tiny glowing buoys. This is the final test of authenticity. Glass or copal would behave differently, but true amber dances in the brine. Satisfied, he begins to dry them one by one with a piece of fine linen. The act of drying the beads is a sensory delight. Each stone, once stripped of its saltwater bath, reveals its true character. Some are as clear as a summer morning, while others are clouded with prehistoric mists, swirling with the butter of ancient resins. As he works, the friction of the linen once again awakens the scent. The cabin is now a thick fog of pine, honey, and old earth, a perfume that has defined his life for 40 winters. He looks at the tray of finished work. By the time the spring caravans arrive, these will be packaged in soft sawdust and packed into sturdy wooden crates. They will travel south, past the great cathedrals and through the mountain passes, eventually finding their way into the hands of those who seek beauty and protection. But here, in the quiet of 1310, they are simply the result of a man's patience against the winter. If you find yourself drifting into the warmth of this medieval sanctuary, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and join our community of history lovers. By liking this video and leaving a comment about which historical era brings you the most peace, you help us keep the hearth fires burning. Your support is the light that guides our storytelling. Sleepy History with Tales is a sleep history storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. The merchant's gaze shifts to a heavy iron-bound chest in the corner of the room. It contains his ledger, a book of vellum and ink that tracks the ebb and flow of his fortune. But tonight he does not reach for the pen. Instead, he reaches for a large, uncut block of amber that has sat at the corner of his bench for weeks. It is the size of a man's fist, a gargantuan specimen pulled from the depths after a particularly violent gale in October. This piece is different. It isn't honey-coloured or cherry red. It is a deep, dark green, almost the colour of the pine needles that once shed the resin. This is sea amber, aged and pressured by the crushing weight of the Baltic for centuries. It is dense, heavy, and mysterious. Herman picks up a broad-bladed chisel and a small wooden mallet. He isn't going to make beads out of this. He is going to create a decorative handle for a ceremonial dagger, a piece commissioned by a high-ranking officer of the Teutonic Knights. The first strike of the mallet is a dull thud. A small flake of the dark green crust chips away. Underneath, the colour is even more intense, a swirling forest of moss and emerald. The sound of the carving begins to fill the cabin, a rhythmic tink-tink-tink that competes with the howling wind. It is a slow, methodical process. One wrong move, one strike with too much force, and the priceless block could shatter into 1,000 useless shards. Herman's focus is so narrow that the rest of the cabin seems to vanish. The flickering firelight, the smell of the herbs, the cold at his back, all of it becomes a distant background to the interaction between the steel and the ancient resin. He carves the shape of a stylized wolf's head, the symbol of the knight who ordered the piece. He works on the ears first, tapering the amber into sharp, alert points. As he carves, he thinks about the knight, a man of war, of cold iron and bloody fields. How strange that such a man would desire something as delicate and beautiful as amber. Perhaps Herman muses, it is because amber represents the opposite of the sword. The sword takes life in a moment of violence. The amber preserves it for an eternity of silence. In the knight's hand, the amber handle will be a reminder of the world worth fighting for, a world of light and stillness. The wolf's eyes are next. He uses a tiny pointed drill to create 2 small depressions. Later he will set these with small chips of clear yellow amber, making the eyes seem to glow from within when the light hits them. The level of detail is exhausting. His eyes ache from the strain of the dim light and his fingers cramp from the precision required. He pauses to stretch, looking up at the smoke-stained rafters. He notices that the frost on the windows has begun to change. The moonlight is fading, replaced by a very faint, bruised purple glow on the eastern horizon. The wolf hour is passing and the first hint of the pre-dawn light is arriving. The wind hasn't died down, but it has lost some of its frantic energy. It is now a steady, mournful hum, a dirge for the dying night. He picks up a piece of fine-grained sandstone to smooth the wolf's snout. The sound is a soft rasp like the breathing of a large animal. He can feel the spirit of the piece coming alive under his hands. This is the moment every artisan lives for. The moment when the material stops being a raw object and starts to have a presence of its own. The amber wolf stares back at him, a silent sentinel of the Baltic winter. He decides to stop for a moment and eat. He breaks off a piece of hard rye bread and tops it with a thick slice of salted fatback. He heats a small pot of cider on the edge of the hearth, the scent of fermented apples and cinnamon rising to join the resinous fog. The simple meal is the height of comfort. He eats slowly, savouring the salt and the warmth, his eyes never leaving the green amber wolf on the bench. The cabin is a world unto itself. Outside, the ice may be thick enough to bear a horse and rider, and the wolves may be prowling the edges of the forest, but here there is food, fire, and the gold of the north. Herman feels a deep sense of gratitude. He is a middleman of history, a shaper of time, and as long as the sea gives up its treasures, he will never truly be alone. The pre-dawn light begins to seep through the gaps in the shutters, a pale ghostly grey that makes the orange glow of the hearth seem even more defiant. Herman sets down his cup of cider. the warmth lingering in his throat. He turns his attention back to the green amber wolf. The rough sanding is complete, and the form of the predator is unmistakable, sleek, powerful, and eternally silent. Now comes the most difficult part, the polishing of the deep recesses. He cannot use a large cloth or a piece of shark skin here. Instead, he takes a small stick of willow wood, its tip frayed into a soft brush, and dips it into a mixture of fine ash and rendered deer tallow. This is the polisher's patience. He must work the paste into every carved line of the wolf's fur and the tiny hollows of its eyes. As he works, the friction creates a localized heat. The green amber, usually so stoic and dark, begins to release its own unique scent. It is deeper than the honey amber, more reminiscent of damp earth and crushed needles than of sweet sap. It is a masculine, grounded fragrance. Hermann's movements are slow and deliberate. Round and round the willow stick goes, a tiny rhythmic friction that slowly coaxes a shine from the shadows of the carving. He thinks about the forest where this resin first fell. Millions of years ago, the Baltic was not a sea, but a vast subtropical woodland. Trees of immense size wept this liquid gold to heal their wounds, unaware that they were creating the only part of themselves that would survive the coming ice ages and the rise of man. To Hermann, he is not just carving a handle, he is excavating a memory of a world that was green and warm long before the first snowflake ever fell on a Baltic dune. The sound in the cabin is hushed. The fire has burned down to a thick bed of embers that pulse like a giant heart. Outside, the world is in that strange, silent suspension that occurs just before sunrise. The wind has dropped to a whisper. The only sound is the soft hush, hush, hush of the willow stick against the stone. It is a lullaby for the soul, a rhythm that syncs with the pulse of the earth itself. He pauses to wipe away the tallow paste with a clean scrap of wool. The transformation is breathtaking. The dark green surface has taken on a vitreous luster, a depth that makes the stone look like frozen lake water. The light from the dying fire catches the curves of the wolf's head, making it seem as though the animal is turning its gaze toward the merchant. It is a masterpiece of both nature and man. He feels a heavy, pleasant exhaustion settling over his limbs. The night's work has been fruitful. He looks at his hands, cracked, stained and dusted with gold, and feels a sense of profound pride. He is a part of a chain of artisans that stretches back to the beginning of time and will likely continue until the sea finally dries up. He places the green wolf in a special padded box, closing the lid with a soft click. Sleepy History with Tales combines the power of AI to reimagine fictional historical tales, bringing peace, relaxation, and positive emotional values to our listeners. The pale light of dawn now presses more firmly against the heavy timber shutters, though it lacks the strength to fully banish the shadows of the cabin. Hermann stands from his workbench, his knees creaking like the old fir beams above him. The intense concentration of the night is beginning to give way to a soft, hazy fatigue, a physical weight that feels as heavy and comforting as a wool blanket. He walks to the window and unlatches a small circular viewing port. The air that rushes in is a cold, sharp needle that pierces the resinous warmth of the room. It smells of salt, frozen iron, and the absolute purity of the Arctic. Outside, the dunes are carved into strange, undulating waves of white, and the Baltic Sea is a jagged field of ice floes frozen mid-grind. There is no movement on the horizon, only the stillness of a world held in a diamond-hard grip. He closes the port, the warmth of the cabin immediately rushing back to embrace him. He returns to the hearth one last time. He doesn't add a large log now. Instead, he tosses in a handful of the amber shavings and dust he collected during the night's work. It is a small ritual, a tribute to the old ones of the forest. The amber dust doesn't just burn, it erupts. A bright, white-gold flare illuminates the room, and for a few seconds the scent of the cabin reaches a crescendo. It is an olfactory explosion, pine, incense, and the very essence of sunlight. The smoke is thick and white, curling up the chimney in elegant ribbons. To Hermann, this is the true prayer of the merchant. It is the scent of a night well spent and a fortune well guarded. He looks back at his workbench. The tools are laid out in perfect order. The bow drill, the shark skin, the deerskin cloths, and the iron knives. They are the extensions of his will, the instruments that allow him to speak to the stones. He picks up a single unpolished bead that had rolled into a corner. He doesn't work it. He simply holds it, feeling its lightness. Amber is surprisingly light for its appearance. It possesses a warmth that real stone never has. In the 14th century, life is often measured by what can be endured. The cold, the hunger, the plagues, and the wars. But in this moment, life is measured by what can be created. Hermann has taken the debris of a storm and turned it into a collection of light. He has defied the winter by creating his own internal sun. He moves toward his sleeping alcove, a small nook recessed into the wall and lined with thick furs and straw. Before he lies down, he takes a final look at the tray of finished beads. They glow in the low light like the eyes of 1,000 friendly spirits. The gold of the north is ready for the world, but for now it will stay here in the safety of the fortress of timber. The rhythmic pulse of the dying embers is the last thing he sees. The sound of the wind, now just a distant hum, is the last thing he hears. He breathes in the lingering scent of the resin, a scent that will stay in his hair and clothes for days to come. It is the smell of his life, the smell of the Baltic, and the smell of a history that refuses to be forgotten. As he closes his eyes, the image of the prehistoric forest returns to him. In his dreams, the sun is high and the trees are weeping. The amber is liquid and flowing, a golden river of life. The winter is gone and the sea is blue. But even in the dream, he knows that the warmth he feels is the warmth of the hearth he built with his own hands. Hermann's eyes grow heavy as he watches the final flicker of the white gold flare subside into the ash. The silence of the cabin is now absolute, a heavy velvet curtain that muffles even the memory of the screaming wind. He knows that in a few hours he will wake to the chore of melting ice for water and splitting more wood, but that is a worry for the sun. For now he is suspended in that blissful state between labor and rest, where the mind is as clear and polished as the amber on his bench. He reaches out one last time, his fingers brushing against a string of finished paternosters. They are cool at first touch, but they quickly take on the heat of his skin, a testament to their organic nature. They feel alive, a chain of golden moments captured in the heart of a frozen waste. He imagines them in the hands of a traveller on the Silk Road or a merchant in the crowded squares of Florence, carrying with them the silent strength of this Baltic cabin. If this story has brought a sense of warmth to your evening, please consider supporting Sleepy History with Tales. You can do this by subscribing to our channel, liking this video, and clicking the notification bell so you never miss a journey into the past. Your engagement helps us continue to craft these immersive experiences for you. We would love to hear from you in the comments. What other ancient craft would you like to see us explore through the lens of history? The merchant finally pulls the heavy bear fur rug over his shoulders. The scent of the resin is still thick in the air, a protective cocoon that seems to ward off the biting chill creeping through the gaps in the door. He is a man who knows the value of patience. He knows that the amber took millions of years to form, and he is content to let his own life unfold with the same slow, deliberate grace. Outside, the first true ray of the winter sun hits the frost on the viewing port, turning the white crystals into a prismatic display of fire, but Hermann does not see it. He is already walking through the sun-drenched forests of his dreams, where the trees bleed gold, and the winter is nothing more than a myth. The gold of the north has done its work for the night. It has provided light, it has provided purpose, and now it provides peace. The transition from wakefulness to sleep is a slow drift, much like a piece of amber settling into the silt of a riverbed. Even in his slumber, Hermann's senses remain attuned to the unique atmosphere of the cabin. The smell of the resin is no longer just a scent, it has become the very air he breathes, a thick golden atmosphere that fills his lungs and calms his heart. It is the scent of deep time, a fragrance that bypasses the logic of the mind and speaks directly to the soul. In the quiet, the cabin itself seems to breathe. The heavy timbers, seasoned by decades of salt spray and wood smoke, expand and contract with the shifting temperature. Each creak of the wood is a familiar voice, a reassurance that the fortress is holding. To an outsider, these sounds might be unsettling, the groans of a living house, but to the merchant they are a lullaby. They tell him that the storm is still at bay and the ice has not yet found a way inside. On the workbench, the finished amber beads catch the stray light of the morning. Even without the direct heat of the fire, they seem to glow with a residual energy. They are like small batteries of light, storing the warmth of the hearth and the friction of Hermann's hands. If one were to touch them now, they would feel strangely tepid, never truly reaching the freezing temperature of the air around them. This is the living quality of amber that has fascinated mankind since the first nomad picked up a piece on a prehistoric beach. Sherman's dream shifts. He is no longer in the forest, but on the shore during the great autumn storm that brought him this bounty. He sees the grey, churning Atlantic, the waves taller than the masts of a cog, slamming into the dunes with the force of a falling mountain. He remembers the sound, a roar so loud it felt like the world was tearing apart. And then as the tide receded, he saw it, the black mats of sea wrack, the tangled seaweed and debris thrown up by the deep currents. And within that black tangle, the gold. In his dream, he is back on his knees in the wet sand, his fingers numb with cold, plucking the raw stones from the kelp. Each find is a jolt of adrenaline, a spark of heat in the freezing rain. This is the merchant's true harvest. He doesn't plant seeds in the earth. He waits for the sea to plough its own depths and offer up its hidden treasures. It is a gamble with the elements, a life dictated by the moon and the wind. He shifts under the heavy furs, a small smile playing on his lips. The memory of the cold in his dream only makes the reality of the cabin's warmth more sweet. He is safe, the harvest is gathered, the work of the hands has justified the risk of the heart. The Baltic winter can howl until its lungs burst, but it cannot take the gold that has already been turned into light. The morning sun, though pale and weak, begins to climb higher. It hits the row of finished beads, and for a moment 100 tiny suns are reflected onto the ceiling of the cabin. They dance across the dried herbs and the soot-stained beams, a silent celebration of the craft. The night of labour is over, and the day of rest has begun in the golden sanctuary of the merchant. The sun, now higher in the sky, begins to reveal the true textures of the merchant's inner sanctum. In the daylight, the cabin loses its flickering, mysterious shadows and takes on a rustic, solid clarity. The workbench, scarred by years of chisels and needles, is covered in a fine golden dust that looks like the pollen of a celestial flower. Hermann remains deep in his recovery, his breathing slow and rhythmic, a mirror to the steady, unhurried growth of the very trees that once birthed his livelihood. Resting on a small shelf above his bed is his personal collection, pieces of amber that were never meant for sale. One is a perfectly clear sphere, the colour of a setting sun, within which a tiny piece of oak bark is suspended. Another is a jagged, raw hunk that looks like frozen lightning. These are his touchstones in the medieval world, where life is often fleeting and unpredictable. These stones are symbols of permanence. They have survived the drowning of forests and the shifting of continents. They will surely survive a single Baltic winter. The air in the cabin has cooled slightly as the fire has transitioned from flames to a deep, radiating heat from the stone hearth. This subtle drop in temperature actually helps clarify the scent of the room. The initial sharpness of the wood smoke has faded, leaving behind the pure, crystalline aroma of the amber. It is a scent that feels clean, not like the soaps of the city, but like the cleanliness of a mountain wind or a sun-warmed clearing. It is a fragrance that cleanses the mind of worry. As the merchant sleeps, the silence of the dunes outside is broken only by the occasional boom of the sea ice. This sound, caused by the expansion of the ice as the sun's weak rays touch it, echoes like a distant drum. In the village miles away, people are huddling around communal fires, sharing stories of the ice giants and the spirits of the north. But here, Hermann is his own company. His isolation is not a burden, It is a choice made to protect the integrity of his work. On the workbench, a small moth, perhaps awakened by the unnatural warmth of the cabin, flutters toward the row of polished beads. It lands on the large teardrop-shaped piece Hermann finished earlier in the night. For a moment, the living insect and the fossilized remains of the ancient world are united. The moth's wings, delicate and dusty, contrast with the hard, vitreous luster of the stone. It is a brief, beautiful intersection of two timelines, one measured in days, the other in millions of years. The light continues to crawl across the room, illuminating the jars of linseed oil, the bundles of wool, and the iron tools. Each object tells a story of preparation. To be an amber merchant is to be a master of logistics as much as art. He must know where the best flax is grown for his oil, which sheep produce the most lanolin-rich wool for polishing, and which blacksmith can forge a needle that won't snap under the pressure of the bow drill. Hermann stirs slightly, the heavy furs rustling in his mind. He is already planning the next night's labor. There are still raw stones in the bucket, still sea-skin to be scraped away, and still light to be liberated from the dark. But for now the body demands its due. The stillness of the cabin is a cocoon, protecting him from the harshness of the 14th century, allowing him to dream of a spring that, though distant, is inevitable. The afternoon sun reaches its zenith, casting a sharp slanted beam through the ventilation slat that falls directly onto the merchant's scales. These scales, made of polished brass and hanging from a blackened iron stand, are the final judges of his work. In the world of 1310, amber is sold not just by beauty, but by weight and clarity. A single ounce of the finest cherry amber can be worth more than a dozen barrels of salted herring. Even in his sleep, Hermann is a man of precision. His hand, resting atop the fur coverlet, twitches slightly, as if still guiding the bow drill through a stubborn piece of resin. The cabin has reached a perfect thermal equilibrium. The chill of the Baltic is held at a distance by the thick log walls, while the residual heat from the hearth keeps the air soft and dry. This dry air is essential. Dampness can cloud the surface of polished amber, stealing the luster he worked so hard to achieve. On the floor near the hearth, a small pile of birch bark and kindling waits for his eventual awakening. The fire has now retreated into a bed of glowing orange jewels buried under a layer of fine white ash. Occasionally, a small pocket of gas within a charcoal ember ignites, producing a tiny blue flame that dances for a few seconds before vanishing. It is the only movement in the room, a silent flickering that matches the slow, deep rhythm of the merchant's breath. The scent in the cabin has evolved once more. The heavy, resinous notes have settled, replaced by a subtle, sweet woodiness. It is a comforting smell, like an old library or a spice merchant's warehouse. It speaks of stability and wealth, of a life built on the solid foundation of a specialized trade. To breathe this air is to inhale the essence of the medieval guild system, the pride of the master, the silence of the workshop, and the value of a craft perfected over a lifetime. Outside, a snowy owl glides silently over the dunes, its white feathers nearly invisible against the frozen landscape. It perches for a moment on the peak of the cabin's roof, its sharp talons scratching against the frosted thatch. Inside, the sound is a faint, rhythmic tapping, like the ghost of a carver working on a distant bench. Hermann does not wake. He simply incorporates the sound into his dream, where it becomes the sound of a ship's hammer at the docks of Danzig. The shadows begin their slow, inevitable stretch across the floorboards as the sun starts its descent. The golden hour of the afternoon is approaching, a time when the entire world outside will turn the color of the stones on Hermann's bench. But for now, the merchant remains in his sanctuary, a king of shadows and light, resting before the cycle of the hearth and the amber begins anew. The afternoon light begins to deepen into a rich burnt orange, a color that perfectly mirrors the darker honey amber sitting on the edge of the workbench. This is the hour when the cabin feels most like a treasure chest. Every surface, the iron pots, the wooden spoons, even the coarse grain of the floorboards seems to soak up the waning sun, reflecting a warmth that is as much visual as it is physical. Hermann remains in a deep, restorative sleep, his body replenishing the energy required for the intense singular focus of his craft. On the workbench, the small amberfish he carved earlier sits in a pool of direct sunlight. The light enters the stone and becomes trapped, bouncing between the internal fractures and the hand-etched scales until the entire carving seems to vibrate with light. It looks less like a piece of resin and more like a captured spark of the sun itself. This is the phenomenon that made the ancients believe amber was solidified sunlight, a piece of the heavens that fell into the sea. The silence within the timber walls is textured, composed of many small, quiet layers. There is the occasional soft crackle of a cooling log in the hearth, the dry rustle of the hanging herbs as the air circulates, and the rhythmic low-frequency hum of the wind as it passes over the chimney. It is a silence that invites reflection. If one were to stand in this room, the urge to speak would vanish, replaced by a profound respect for the stillness and the history it contains. The merchant's tools, momentarily abandoned, possess a quiet dignity of their own. The bow drill, with its horsehair string slightly slack, carries the faint scent of the friction it endured. The iron knives, their edges still keen and bright, reflect the orange light like slivers of ice. These tools are the bridge between the raw, chaotic energy of the Baltic Sea and the refined, orderly world of the merchant's trade. They are the instruments of transformation, turning the sea tears into the gold of the north. As the sun dips lower, a long shadow from a nearby dune stretches across the cabin, slowly extinguishing the light on the workbench. The amber fish fades from a brilliant glow to a deep, smouldering red. The change in light signals the approaching end of the day's rest. Soon the merchant will stir, his internal clock tuned to the rising of the moon and the deepening of the frost. In the corner, the bucket of raw amber shards waits. There are still many sea skins to be peeled back, many inclusions to be discovered, and many stories to be told by the friction of the cloth. But for these final moments of the afternoon, the cabin remains a temple of perfect peace. The scent of the resin, now a faint and ghostly sweetness, lingers in the air like a promise of another night of creation, warmth, and the quiet triumph of a craftsman against the winter dark. The sun finally slips below the horizon, leaving the Baltic coast in a bruised violet twilight. Inside the cabin, the transition is felt as a subtle tightening of the air. The cold outside is gaining strength, pressing its weight against the timber walls once more. Herman stirs, his fingers twitching against the bare fur rug as the internal rhythm of the craftsman overrides the heaviness of sleep. He sits up slowly, the cabin draped in the deep blue shadows of dusk. For a moment he simply listens. The wind has returned, but it is no longer the frantic scream of the previous night. It is a steady, low-frequency roar, like a distant waterfall. He reaches out and finds the flint and steel on the small table beside his bed. The clink-clink spark of the metal is a sharp waking sound. A tiny spark catches on a nest of charred linen, and with a gentle breath he coaxes a small flame into existence. He carries this flame to the hearth where the buried embers still hold a stubborn, secret heat. He feeds them thin splinters of pine, then larger chunks of birch. The fire grows, leaping upward to reclaim its territory, and the amber-colored light returns to the walls. The smell of fresh wood smoke, sharp and invigorating, cuts through the settled, sweet scent of the resin. Sherman stands and stretches, his shadow a towering giant against the rafters. He walks to the workbench and picks up a large, unworked piece of amber, one that feels particularly cold. He holds it for a moment, letting the warmth of his hand begin the long process of waking the stone. This is the start of a new cycle. The tools are ready, the fire is fed, and the golden work begins again. He looks at the small amber fish he carved in the firelight. It seems to wink at him. He places it in a small leather pouch tied to his belt, a personal talisman for the night ahead. He then reaches for the heavy bucket of raw amber. He pours a handful of the crusty, salt-crusted stones onto the table. They clatter like dry bones, but Herman sees only the light trapped within. The rhythm of the new night establishes itself with the first steady strokes of the scraping knife. Herman works through the pile of raw amber, his movements fluid and economical. Each stone has a different resistance. Some have a thick, limestone-like crust that requires a heavy hand, while others are merely dusted with salt and sand, yielding their secrets with a single pass of the blade. The pile of golden flakes at the base of his workbench grows, a miniature dune of prehistoric dust. As the sea skin is removed, the cabin's atmosphere undergoes its nightly transformation. The fresh, sharp scent of the burning birch in the hearth competes with the deep, musky release of the amber. It is an olfactory battle between the present and the ancient past. To Herman, this blend is the very air of his existence. He can tell the quality of a stone just by the scent it releases when the knife first bites into it. Sweet and floral indicates a clear, high-quality resin, while a more acrid, sulphurous smell warns of internal impurities or sun-spangles that might cause the stone to crack during drilling. He picks up a medium-sized piece that has a peculiar, flattened shape. As he cleans it, he realizes it isn't a single stone, but a flow, a place where two separate drips of resin met and melded together millions of years ago. The interface between the two flows creates a beautiful, rippling pattern inside the stone, like smoke caught in a bottle. He decides this piece will not be cut into beads. Instead, he will polish it as a single large pendant, a heartstone for a wealthy merchant's wife in the southern cities. Outside, the Baltic is restless. Though the ice is thick, the immense pressure of the tides causes the frozen sheets to groan and buckle. A long, low sound, like a distant thunderclap, vibrates through the ground and into the floorboards of the cabin. Herman pauses for a second, feeling the vibration through the soles of his boots. It is a reminder that his fortress is merely a guest on this wild coast. The sea gives, but the sea also commands respect. He returns to his work, the sound of the knife scritching once more. He begins to hum a low, wordless tune, a melody his father used to sing while mending nets. The song fills the small gaps in the silence, creating a bridge between the solitary merchant and the generations of coastal folk who came before him. In 1310, music is not something you listen to, it is something you make to keep the darkness at bay. The heat from the hearth is now a steady, pulsing force. Herman sheds his heavy outer wool tunic, working in his linen undershirt despite the freezing temperatures just outside the door. His skin glistens with a fine sheen of sweat and amber dust. He looks like a bronze statue come to life, a creator at the center of his own universe. The transition from the raw, salt-crusted pebbles to the glowing jewels in the tray is a miracle he never tires of witnessing. He picks up a small piece of fine-grained pumice to begin the smoothing of the heart stone. The sound changes to a soft, rhythmic shush-shush. The resin begins to warm under the friction of the volcanic rock. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting his hands guide the work. In the darkness of his mind, he can see the finished piece, a shimmering golden heart that will outlast the person who wears it, a fragment of the sun that will never grow cold. The merchant's hands move with a deliberate, hypnotic grace as he transitions from the pumice to a finer grit of powdered bone. The heartstone is beginning to surrender its rugged exterior, revealing a core of such intense clarity that it seems to magnify the grain of the oak workbench beneath it. Herman leans closer, the heat from the hearth warming the side of his face. He is looking for sun spangles, those tiny circular internal fractures that occur when the amber is subjected to extreme heat or pressure in the earth. To the untrained eye, they look like shimmering scales or golden coins trapped in the resin. To a master like Herman, they are both a blessing and a curse. They add a brilliant, glittery beauty to the stone, but they also represent points of structural weakness that must be navigated with the utmost care. The sound in the cabin has deepened. The soft hush-hush of the bone dust polish is a dry, whispering sound that seems to draw the silence out of the corners. Outside, the Baltic night has reached a state of frozen stasis. The wind has dropped to a low, mournful sigh that vibrates through the chimney, sounding like the breath of a sleeping giant. The temperature has plummeted so far that the very air feels brittle. Herman can hear the occasional crack of the timber walls as the wood fibers contract in the extreme cold. It is a sharp, skeletal sound, a reminder that only a few inches of pine and moss stand between the warmth of his life and the lethal indifference of the winter. He picks up a fresh cloth, this one saturated with a thicker application of linseed oil mixed with a hint of pulverized pine soot. This mixture is used to deepen the color of the heart stone, bringing out the rich reddish-brown tones hidden within the golden matrix. As he rubs, the friction generates a heat that is almost too hot to touch. The scent of the resin becomes overwhelming, not in an unpleasant way, but in a manner that feels heavy and intoxicating. It is the smell of a million summers condensed into a single cubic inch of matter. Herman feels a sense of light-headedness, a resin fever that often strikes amber workers during long nights. The world outside the circle of firelight ceases to exist. There is no 1310, no Teutonic Knights, no debts to the Hanseatic League. There is only the circular motion of his hand and the slow, inevitable birth of a jewel. He pauses to wipe the stone clean, his chest heaving slightly from the exertion. The heartstone now possesses a vitreous luster that rivals the finest Venetian glass. The two flows he discovered earlier have merged into a stunning visual spectacle, a swirling vortex of gold and cream that seems to move when the stone is tilted. He holds it up to the hearth, and the firelight enters the amber, turning it into a glowing coal. It is a piece of extraordinary power. He imagines the woman who will eventually wear it. She will feel its warmth against her skin, and perhaps for a fleeting moment, she will sense the ancient forest and the lonely merchant who brought this light out of the dark. The pile of golden dust at his feet has grown thick enough to muffle his footsteps. He takes a moment to sweep it into a small wooden box, a task he performs with religious care. This dust is the memory of the stone, and it is too precious to be lost to the cracks in the floorboards. He looks at his reflection in the dark window glass, seen through a gap in the frost. He sees a man whose life is inextricably tied to the sea's leavings. He is the alchemist of the dunes, turning the tears of trees into the currency of kings. He takes a long, slow draw of the resin-scented air, closes his eyes, and prepares to begin the final, most delicate stage of the night's labor. Sherman settles back into his heavy oak chair, the wood groaning in sympathy with his tired joints. The night is far from over, and the heartstone still requires the final, most transformative touch. He reaches for a piece of exceptionally soft chamois leather, worn thin by years of use until it feels like the skin of a ripened plum. This is the stage where the merchant becomes a magician. He applies a microscopic amount of refined beeswax to the leather, just enough to give it a slight tackiness. As he begins to buff the stone, the sound changes from a dry rustle to a wet, squeaking chirp, the sound of true amber reaching its peak of luster. The friction creates a localized heat so intense that the merchant must switch hands frequently to avoid burning his fingertips. With every pass, the heartstone becomes more translucent, as if the physical matter is slowly being replaced by pure light. The swirling patterns inside, the meeting of the two ancient flows, start to look like a nebulae in a distant galaxy. Herman finds himself staring into the depths of the stone, his mind drifting back through the eons. He sees the giant pinnite succinifer trees weeping their sticky lifeblood to heal wounds caused by prehistoric storms or boring insects. He sees the forest floor, a carpet of ferns and moss, receiving the golden drops. He sees the slow, inexorable drowning of that world as the sea rose, burying the forest under layers of silt and salt for 50 million years. The scent in the cabin has now reached its zenith, a thick atmospheric blanket that seems to vibrate with energy. It is a complex bouquet, the sharp medicinal tang of the raw resin, the sweet floral undertone of the beeswax, and the underlying earthy scent of the peat fire. It is a scent that doesn't just sit in the nose, it settles in the back of the throat, tasting of history and sun-drenched timber. Herman breathes it in deeply, feeling his heart rate slow and his focus sharpen. In the medieval world, where the air is often filled with the stench of open sewers, damp straw, and unwashed bodies, this cabin is a sensory paradise, a literal breath of fresh air from a world before the fall of man. Outside, a sudden crackle of the sea ice echoes through the floorboards, a sound like a massive whip being snapped against the horizon. The ice quake causes a small ceramic bowl on the shelf to dance, But Herman's hands remain rock steady. He is in the flow, that state of being where the tool, the stone, and the man are a single unified entity. He knows exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to increase the speed of the buffing, and exactly when to pull back. It is a knowledge that cannot be taught in books. It must be earned through thousands of hours of silence and the sacrifice of one's own skin to the abrasive dust. If you are finding peace in the rhythmic work of our 14th century merchant, please take a moment to subscribe and join us by the fire. Your likes and comments help our channel grow, ensuring that these stories of quiet craftsmanship and historical wonder continue to reach those who need a moment of calm. Tell us in the comments, if you could hold a piece of history in your hand, what would it be? As the heartstone reaches its final state of perfection, Herman holds it up to the waning firelight. The stone is no longer just a commodity, it is a testament to survival. It has survived the death of its parent tree, the crushing weight of the ocean, the violence of the autumn gales, and the abrasive touch of the merchant's tools. Now it shines with a defiant internal fire. Herman sets it down on a bed of dark green velvet, where it looks like a fallen star resting on a mossy bank. He takes a moment to wipe the sweat from his brow with a corner of his apron, his eyes reflecting the golden glow of his masterpiece. The winter may be outside, but inside this cabin, the sun has been reborn in the palm of a man's hand. Sleepy History with Tales is a sleep history storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. Herman leans back for a moment, his lungs drawing in the thick, resinous air of the cabin. The heartstone sits finished on its velvet bed, but the merchant's night is not defined by a single masterpiece. It is defined by the relentless pursuit of light within the darkness. He reaches into the wooden bucket once more, his calloused fingers sifting through the remaining raw amber like a miser counting coins. He pulls out a cluster of small, pebble-sized stones, still encased in their grey, calcified seaskin. These will be the beads for a rosary, a task that requires a different kind of endurance, a repetitive meditative precision that mirrors the prayers they will eventually count. He sets up his bow drill, a primitive yet effective tool made of a curved yew branch and a string of braided horsehair. The drill bit is a needle of fine steel, sharpened to a point that can pierce the heart of a grain of sand. He begins to pump the bow, the string whirring with a rhythmic zip-zip-zip sound that becomes the new heartbeat of the room. As the needle bites into the first bead, a tiny plume of golden smoke rises, the friction heating the amber until it releases its most concentrated essence. The scent is sharp, almost spicy, a concentrated burst of ancient pine needles and sun-baked earth that makes the merchant's eyes water slightly. The physical demand of the bow drill is significant. It requires a delicate balance of downward pressure and lateral speed, too much pressure, and the brittle bead will shatter into 1,000 useless shards, too little, and the needle will merely polish the surface without penetrating. Herman's breath becomes a steady, forced rhythm that matches the motion of his arm. Zip, zip, zip. The cabin, illuminated by the steady orange pulse of the hearth, feels like it is vibrating in sympathy with the drill. Outside, the world has entered the hour of the ghost, that deepest part of the night, where the stars seem to crackle with cold, and the shadows on the dunes move with a life of their own. But inside there is only the friction, the gold, and the man. As each bead is pierced, Herman slides it onto a length of sturdy linen thread. He watches the pile grow, a caterpillar of translucent honey and lemon. He thinks about the journey these beads will take. From this lonely cabin on the edge of the world, they will travel to the great cathedrals of Cologne or the quiet monasteries of the Alps. They will be held by fingers trembling with age or slick with the sweat of fever, serving as a physical anchor for the spirit. It is a profound thought that the resin of a tree that died 50 million years ago could provide comfort to a human soul in the year 1310. This connection to the deep past and the distant future is what keeps Herman's hands steady when the fatigue begins to cloud his vision. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a massive glowing core of red gold embers, casting a steady, shadowless light across the workbench. The scent of the cabin has shifted again, becoming heavier and more oily as the linseed and beeswax from the earlier polishing mingle with the fresh dust of the drilling. It is an atmosphere of profound safety. Herman feels as though he is submerged in a warm, amber-colored sea, protected from the jagged edges of the medieval world. Here there is no plague, no war, no hunger, only the perfect geometric progression of the beads and the intoxicating aroma of a life dedicated to beauty. He pauses to sharpen his drill bit on a whetstone, the metallic shing-shing sound a sharp, clean counterpoint to the organic whir of the bow. He wipes a bead of sweat from his chin with his shoulder, his eyes never leaving the golden harvest on his bench. The winter may be an eternal frozen wall outside his door, but within these four walls of timber and moss, Herman is a king of the sun, weaving the light of the past into the hope of the future. Every bead is a victory over the dark, a tiny glowing defiance against the cold. If these details of the merchant's craft are helping you find your own center of calm, please consider supporting the channel. By subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments, you help us bring more of these hidden histories to light. What era of history makes you feel most at peace? We read every comment as we sit by our own digital hearth. Sleepy History with Tales combines the power of AI to reimagine fictional historical tales, bringing peace, relaxation, and positive emotional values to our listeners. Sherman's focus narrows until the entire universe is reduced to the tip of his steel needle and the golden heart of a single bead. The bow drill continues its relentless, rhythmic zip, 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 a sound that has become a fundamental law of the cabin. Each time the needle breaks through the underside of a bead, a tiny, perfect circle of amber falls onto the bench, joining the drifts of golden dust that shimmer like fallen stars in the firelight. He has moved past the stage of conscious effort. His muscles, conditioned by decades of this labor, move with a mechanical grace that requires no thought. This is the artisan's trance, a state of being where the passage of time is measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the slow accumulation of finished work. The scent in the room has reached a level of staggering complexity. The friction of the drill has released the soul of the amber, a sharp, almost citrus-like top note that dances over the heavy bass aromas of the peat fire and the seasoned oak beams. It is an air so thick with history that it feels as though one could reach out and pluck a memory from the atmosphere. To Herman, the scent is a map. He can smell the difference between the sea-washed stones, which carry a faint, briny tang, and the pit-mined stones, which smell of deep earth and ancient rot. This olfactory wisdom is his most prized possession, a secret language shared only between the merchant and the resin. He pauses to replenish the hearth, tossing in several thick rounds of dried apple wood he had been saving for just such a moment. As the fruitwood catches, a new scent joins the symphony, a sweet, crisp aroma that cuts through the heavy resinous fog like a ray of light through a storm cloud. The fire flares up, casting long, flickering shadows that dance across the ceiling like the ghosts of the prehistoric trees themselves. Herman watches the flames for a moment, his eyes reflecting the chaotic dance of orange and blue. He feels a deep, soul-level warmth. In the 14th century, fire is not just a utility. It is the center of the world, the only thing standing between a man and the absolute crushing silence of the void. He turns back to the workbench to begin the polishing of the rosary beads. He uses a specialized bag made of heavy, coarse hemp, filling it with the newly drilled beads and a generous amount of fine sea sand. He grips the neck of the bag and begins to shake it with a steady, oscillating motion. The sound is like the receding tide on a shingle beach, a rhythmic, abrasive hush-shush, hush-shush. This dry polishing will knock off the sharp edges left by the drill and give the beads a uniform, matte finish before the final buffing with wool and oil. The physical exertion makes his shoulders ache, but the rhythm is soothing, a physical mantra that pushes the last remnants of fatigue from his mind. Outside, the Baltic night is shifting, the stars have begun to pale, and the deep indigo of the sky is being replaced by a cold, translucent charcoal. The wolf hour has passed, and the hour of the artisan has begun, that thin slice of time before the sun rises. when the world is at its most quiet and the mind is at its most creative. Herman can feel the shift in the air. The pressure is dropping and a soft, heavy snowfall has begun to descend, muffling the world outside even further. The cabin is now a bubble of light and heat floating in a sea of silent white. He opens the hemp bag and pours the beads into a wooden bowl. They are no longer rough pebbles, they are smooth, tactile orbs, each one unique in its internal landscape. Some contain tiny bubbles of air trapped 50 million years ago, breath from a world that no longer exists. Others hold microscopic fragments of moss or a single perfect wing of a gnat. Herman picks up one such bead, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. He marvels at the thought that he is the first living being to see this insect since it was entombed in the sticky sap of a long-dead forest. He feels a profound sense of stewardship. He is not just a merchant, he is a keeper of time, a bridge between the ancient sun and the medieval winter. As he prepares the final vat of polishing oil, a mixture of linseed, lavender oil, and a secret ingredient passed down from his grandfather, the cabin is filled with a scent so divine it feels almost holy. It is the scent of a completed journey. The raw stones of the sea have been tamed, shaped, and enlightened. Herman looks at the rows of beads, the heart stone, and the amber fish, all glowing with an internal fire that no winter can extinguish. He is ready for the dawn. He is ready for the world. But for now he lingers in the golden silence of his creation, a master of light in a world of shadows. Sleepy History with Tales is a sleep history storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. The first hint of pre-dawn light, a thin, jagged line of pale violet, appears on the horizon, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere remains thick with the concentrated essence of 1,000 years. Herman is now engaged in the grand buffing, the final and most demanding stage of the rosary's creation. He has laid out a long strip of thick, felted wool, saturated with the secret lavender-linseed oil mixture. He takes a handful of the sand-smoothed beads and begins to rub them vigorously back and forth along the wool. The sound is a high-pitched, energetic whir, 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 the sound of friction fighting the cold. This process doesn't just polish, it generates a deep internal heat that causes the amber to bloom, its scent intensifying until it feels as though the merchant is breathing liquid gold. The scent profile of the cabin has shifted into its final, most glorious phase. The sharp medicinal bite of the raw resin has been completely smoothed away, replaced by the floral sweetness of the lavender and the rich, nutty aroma of the heated linseed oil. Underneath it all sits the ancient grounding scent of the amber itself, a smell that Herman can only describe as the memory of the sun. It is a fragrance that seems to expand the walls of the small timber room, making the cramped workshop feel as vast as the prehistoric forest. This is the scent of victory. In the 14th century, where life is often a struggle for mere survival, this level of sensory refinement is a luxury beyond measure. Herman breathes it in, letting it fill his lungs and steady his heart for the final push toward the morning. As he works, the merchant's mind wanders to the marketplace in Danzig, where these beads will soon be displayed. He sees the chaos of the docks, the shouting of the porters, the smell of drying fish and tar, the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones. His beads will be the silent center of that storm. A nobleman might purchase them for his daughter's wedding, or a monk might trade a year's worth of honey for a single strand. Herman doesn't care who the final owner is, his loyalty is to the stone. He is the midwife of the amber, the one who ensures that the light trapped within for millions of years is finally liberated. The whir, whir, whir of the wool continues, a rhythmic anthem to the dignity of labor. Outside, the new snow continues to fall, draping the dunes in a heavy sound-dampening shroud. The cabin has become a true island, disconnected from the rest of the world. Even the sound of the sea ice has been muffled by the white blanket. Herman feels a profound sense of peace. The artisan's trance is reaching its conclusion, leaving him with a clarity of thought that only comes at the end of a long, productive night. He looks at his hands, the skin stained with oil, the nails dusted with gold, the joints stiff but capable. These are the hands of a man who knows his place in the world. He is a shaper of time, a guardian of the gold of the north. He picks up a single bead from the wool strip and holds it up to the dying embers of the hearth. It is perfect. The surface is so smooth it feels like silk, and the internal clarity is so deep that the light seems to get lost inside it before finding its way back out. He can see a tiny microscopic fleck of prehistoric ash trapped at the very center, a silent witness to a volcanic eruption that happened before the first human ever walked the earth. Herman places the bead back with its brothers, a small golden tear of history. He is ready to string them now, a final task of steady hands and quiet breath before the sun claims the sky. If this journey into the 14th century workshop has brought you a sense of quiet and contentment, we invite you to stay with us. By subscribing to Sleepy History with Tales and hitting the like button, you help us keep the fire burning and the stories flowing. Your presence in our community is the most valuable treasure we have. Tell us in the comments, if you were an artisan in the Middle Ages, which craft would you choose to master? Sleepy History with Tales combines the power of AI to reimagine fictional historical tales, bringing peace, relaxation, and positive emotional values to our listeners. The final sliver of darkness is being devoured by a cold, metallic dawn, but within the timber walls, Herman is entering the most delicate phase of his nightly vigil, the stringing of the beads. He takes a long, waxed thread of pure silk, dyed a deep crimson to contrast with the golden amber. The scent of the wax, beeswax harvested from the inland meadows during the height of July, adds a final sweet note to the cabin's atmospheric symphony. As he threads the needle, a fine sliver of tempered iron, the silence in the room becomes so profound that he can hear the rhythmic tink of the metal needle against the polished stones. Each bead slides onto the silk with a soft, satisfying click, a sound that marks the transition from individual fragments of nature to a unified work of human devotion. The olfactory environment has reached its absolute saturation point. The heat from the hearth has been maintained at a steady, pulsing glow, ensuring that the oils and resins on the workbench remain active and fragrant. The air is a heavy golden mist of lavender, linseed pine, and prehistoric sap. It is a scent that feels like an embrace, a physical weight that anchors Herman to his stool even as his spirit drifts. This is the merchant's reward, that brief moment where the work is nearly done. The fatigue has become a warm hum in the blood, and the air is so thick with beauty that one could almost taste the history. Herman breathes deeply, the scent of the 14th century filling his lungs, reminding him that while empires may fall and kings may perish, the craft and the stone remain eternal. As the rosary takes shape, Herman's mind traces the future path of his creation. From the frozen Baltic dunes, this strand of light will travel south, perhaps hidden in a leather pouch on a merchant's belt. As they cross the treacherous mountain passes of the Harz, it will survive the damp of the Low Countries and the heat of the Lombardy plains. It will be held by a mother praying for her child's health, or a knight seeking courage before a battle. The amber beads will absorb the warmth of countless human palms, their luster only deepening with every prayer whispered over them. Herman feels a sense of quiet pride. He is not just selling a commodity, he is providing a vessel for human hope, crafted from the very tears of the earth. Outside, the snow has stopped, leaving the world in a state of breathtaking crystalline purity. The white dunes meet the grey sea in a line so sharp it looks like a blade. Inside, Herman reaches the end of the silk thread. He ties the final knot, a complex, secure weaver's hitch, and then attaches the centerpiece, the heartstone he polished earlier. The finished rosary lies coiled on the workbench, a shimmering serpent of gold and crimson. It is a masterpiece of balance and light. The merchant picks it up, letting it drape through his fingers. The weight is substantial, a comforting gravity that speaks of quality and permanence. He stands up, his shadow long and thin in the morning light. The fatigue is there, a heavy curtain behind his eyes, but it is a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from the complete expenditure of one's skill and spirit. He looks around his small kingdom, The tools are scattered, the golden dust covers every surface, and the scent of the resin still hangs like a holy incense. He has survived another night. He has turned the chaos of the storm into the order of the artisan. As he prepares to bank the fire and find his rest, he knows that the gold he has created will shine long after his own name is forgotten by the sea. If the rhythmic labor of Herman the merchant has brought a sense of peace to your soul, we invite you to continue this journey with us. Please consider subscribing to Sleepy History with Tales, liking this video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your support is the heartbeat of our channel, allowing us to weave these immersive tales of history and tranquility. Which part of the Merchant's Workshop did you find most soothing tonight? We look forward to your stories. Sleepy History with Tales is a sleep history storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. The sun finally breaks over the horizon, not with a roar, but with a silent, blinding flash across the frozen Baltic. The light pours through the frost-rimmed windows of the cabin, hitting the workbench with a precision that seems divine. Herman stands frozen for a moment, his hand still curled around the finished rosary. In this new light, the amber beads do not just glow, they seem to ignite. The crimson silk thread looks like a vein of life running through a spine of solid sunshine. This is the apotheosis of the stone, the moment when the artisan's labor is validated by the very star that created the resin 50 million years ago. The merchant feels a shiver of awe that has nothing to do with the cold. He is witnessing the meeting of two infinities, the ancient past of the forest and the eternal present of the morning. The scent in the cabin has been transformed by the arrival of the sun. The warmth hitting the resinous dust on the floorboards causes a final glorious release of aroma. It is a cleaner, more ethereal scent than the heavy, smoky fragrance of the night. The lavender has faded, leaving behind the pure, sharp clarity of the amber and the dry, ancient smell of the sun-warmed timber. It is the scent of a cathedral before the first candle is lit, hushed, expectant, and holy. Herman draws a long, slow breath, feeling the air settle in his chest like a blessing. The resin fever of the night is gone, replaced by a crystalline sobriety. He is no longer the frantic creator, he is the quiet observer of his own success. He begins the final ritual of the morning, the cleaning of the sanctuary. He moves with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his boots crunching softly on the golden dust. He picks up his tools, the bow drill, the scrapers, the fine needles, and wipes each one with an oiled cloth before returning them to their leather wraps. There is a profound dignity in this maintenance. To care for the tool is to honor the craft. As he works, he thinks of the long line of men who have occupied this stretch of coast, each one wrestling with the sea and the stone. He is merely a link in a chain, a temporary guardian of the gold of the north. This realization does not diminish him, it grounds him. He is part of the history he carves. He takes a small carved wooden box, lined with the softest sheep's wool, and carefully places the rosary and the heartstone inside. He closes the lid, the soft thud of the wood on wood sounding like a period at the end of a long, complex sentence. The work is done, the treasure is secured. He walks to the hearth and uses a heavy iron poker to bank the fire, burying the last glowing embers deep within the ash to preserve the heat for the coming night. The room dims slightly, the orange glow receding to make way for the silver light of the day. The transition is complete. The night of the artisan has ended, and the day of the merchant has begun. Outside, a lone sea eagle circles the cabin, its cry a sharp, lonely needle in the silent air. Herman looks out at the vast white wilderness of the dunes and the jagged grey ice of the sea. It is a harsh, unforgiving world, but he is not afraid of it. He has his fire, his timber, and his gold. He has the memory of the sun trapped in a box of wool. He moves toward his sleeping alcove, the heavy furs waiting to embrace him. As he lies down, the scent of the resin clinging to his skin acts as a final golden lullaby. He closes his eyes, and before the first dream can take hold, he is already at peace, a master of the shadows who found his way back to the light. If this final chapter of the merchant's vigil has brought you a sense of completion and rest, We invite you to join our community of history lovers by subscribing to Sleepy History with Tales. You help us continue to preserve these moments of quiet wonder and ancient craft. Please like the video and share your favorite detail of the story in the comments. We value your presence here by the hearth more than any amber stone. Until we journey again into the depths of time, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with light. The merchant lies beneath the heavy bear furs, but his mind remains tethered to the workbench he just left. Though his eyes are closed, the internal map of his labor is etched into his consciousness. He can still feel the ghost vibration of the bow drill in his palm and the slick, oily resistance of the polishing cloth. The cabin has reached a state of perfect frigid stillness, save for the rhythmic, muffled ticking of the cooling timbers. The scent of the room has settled into a deep, foundational woodiness, a combination of the aged pine walls and the lingering, sweet phantom of the amber dust. It is an aroma that suggests ancient things, sunken forests, petrified sap, and the slow, inexorable march of the seasons along the Baltic coast. As he drifts on the edge of a deep, dreamless sleep, Herman hears the faint skitter of a winter mouse across the floorboards. In the silence of the 14th century, such a small sound is a landmark. The mouse is likely attracted by the warmth of the hearth or the faint scent of the linseed oil, but Herman finds the sound comforting rather than intrusive. It is a sign of life in the midst of a frozen world. He thinks of his own life in similar terms, a small, persistent spark of warmth, tucked away in the vast, indifferent landscape of the north. His trade is not merely about wealth, it is about the preservation of light. Every bead he shaped tonight, every facet he polished was an act of defiance against the encroaching winter. The physical exhaustion he feels is a heavy, rhythmic pulse in his limbs, a sweet tiredness that only comes when one's skill has been pushed to its absolute limit. In his mind's eye, he follows the journey of the raw stones once more. He sees the great storms of the equinox, the churning grey water of the Vistula lagoon, and the salt-stained men who roam the beaches with their long nets, catching the sea wrack before the tide can reclaim it. He is the one who transforms their rough, salt-caked finds into the gold of the north. It is a sacred alchemy. He recalls the feeling of the raw stones in the bucket, cold, heavy, and unremarkable, and contrasts it with the finished rosary now resting in its wool-lined box. The transformation is a miracle of patience and friction. The scent of the resin on his own fingers is a badge of office, a permanent reminder that he is a man who speaks the language of the earth. Outside, the sun has climbed higher, turning the frosted dunes into a landscape of blinding prismatic fire. The wind has shifted, now blowing from the east, bringing with it the sharp, clean scent of the inland forests. It is a smell of frozen needles and deep snow, a stark contrast to the heavy, resinous atmosphere within the cabin. Herman breathes it in through the small ventilation slat, feeling it clear the last of the resin fever from his mind. He is at peace with the world and his work. He has fulfilled his contract with the stone and the seasons. The silence of the cabin is no longer a void to be filled, it is a reward to be savoured. The merchant finally succumbs to the weight of his exhaustion, sinking into a sleep that is as deep and undisturbed as a piece of amber buried beneath the silt. His breathing slows, matching the steady, unhurried pace of the dunes. He does not dream of markets or money. He dreams of the trees, the towering ancient pines that once stood where the sea now roars. He dreams of the amber flowing like liquid sunlight down their bark, capturing the heat of a prehistoric noon. In his sleep, he is part of that forest, a silent witness to the slow turning of the world's great wheel. The work is finished, the fire is banked, and the gold is safe. Every breath he takes draws in the essence of his workshop, the musk of the fir, the sweetness of the wax, and the eternal grounding scent of the fossilized sun. The sun reaches its midday peak, casting a brilliant vertical light that manages to find even the smallest cracks in the cabin's heavy thatch. Herman is now lost to the world, his sleep so profound that the occasional crack of the shifting sea ice outside doesn't even cause a flicker of his eyelids. The cabin has become a true sensory cocoon. The air, no longer agitated by the movement of the artisan or the roar of the fire, has layered itself by weight. The cool, fresh scent of the snow-dusted floorboards at the bottom, and the warm, thick, almost syrupy aroma of amber and applewood hanging near the rafters. It is a stillness that feels intentional, as if the room itself is holding its breath to protect the merchant's recovery. On the workbench, the fine golden dust, the breath of the amber, has settled into a thin, shimmering veil over the tools. In the direct sunlight, this dust looks like a scattering of microscopic stars. The iron scrapers and the horsehair bow drill, though silent, still carry the residual energy of the night's labor. They sit like veteran soldiers at rest, their edges dulled only by the accumulation of a successful harvest. There is a deep, wordless dignity in this mess. It is the evidence of a life lived with purpose. Every smudge of oil and every splinter of wood tells a story of a man who refused to let the winter dictate the terms of his existence. The merchant's hands, resting atop the dark bear fur, are finally still. The small nicks and abrasions from the sharp resin shards are starting to close, the salt-heavy air of the coast acting as a natural balm. In his sleep, Herman is no longer a merchant or a strategist, he is simply a part of the Baltic's natural cycle. He is as much a fixture of this coast as the dunes or the hardy beach grass. The wealth he creates, those glowing, honey-coloured spheres, will eventually circulate through the veins of Europe, but the man who made them remains here, anchored by the scent of the pine and the rhythm of the tides. Outside, the world is a study in high-contrast monochrome, the blinding white of the fresh drifts and the deep ink-blue shadows of the hollows. A fox trots silently past the cabin, its red fur a sudden startling flame against the snow. It pauses for a moment, its nose twitching at the unfamiliar sweet scent of the amber smoke drifting from the chimney, then continues on its way toward the frozen shoreline. The cabin, despite its human occupant, has been accepted by the wilderness. It is just another outcrop of wood and stone, a warm heart beating in a chest of ice. As the afternoon begins its slow tilt toward evening, the light in the cabin softens, turning from brilliant gold to a mellow aged bronze. This shift in light brings out the deep grain of the oak beams and the rich textures of the hanging herbs. The silence remains unbroken, but it is a living silence, full of the ghosts of the prehistoric forest and the echoes of the merchant's song. Herman stirs slightly, the heavy furs rustling like dry leaves, but he does not wake. The deep peace of the artisan is not easily disturbed. He is resting in the center of a golden circle, safe within the sanctuary he built with his own 2 hands, waiting for the shadows to lengthen so the work can begin anew. The afternoon light begins its slow, inevitable retreat, turning from a sharp, clinical white into a deep, syrup-like gold that floods the cabin one last time before the shadows return. Herman remains in the deepest well of his slumber, his body almost indistinguishable from the heavy bear furs that cover him. In this state of total repose, the cabin performs its own quiet work. The heat from the banked fire has permeated the thick logs of the walls, creating a radiant warmth that slowly releases the sense of the past night in reverse. First, the delicate floral hint of the lavender oil rises, followed by the heavier, nutty scent of the linseed, and finally the foundational primal musk of the raw amber itself. It is as if the air is replaying the merchant's labor in a soft, olfactory echo. On the workbench, the finished rosary and the heart stone remain tucked inside their wooden sanctuary, but the space around them is far from empty. The air is thick with gold dust, those microscopic particles of amber that were liberated by the drill and the scraper. In the slanting rays of the dying sun, these particles dance in a slow, hypnotic swirl, looking like a miniature cosmos trapped within the 4 walls of the timber room. To an observer, it would seem as though the very atmosphere of the cabin had become a solid gemstone. This is the aura of the artisan, a physical manifestation of the intense, focused energy that Herman poured into his work while the rest of the world was frozen in sleep. The silence of the late afternoon is punctuated only by the occasional thump of snow sliding off the steep pitch of the roof. Outside, the world is preparing for the return of the frost. The sea eagle that circled earlier has vanished, replaced by the first few stars blinking into existence over the grey-blue horizon of the Baltic. The temperature is already dropping, and a thin crystalline layer of ice is beginning to reform over the tracks left by the morning fox. But inside, the cabin holds its own. The insulation of moss and clay packed tightly between the logs keeps the biting cold at a respectful distance. The merchant's sanctuary is a miracle of 14th century engineering, a small warm heart beating in a chest of ice and wind. Hermann's dream of the ancient forest deepens. In his mind, he isn't just watching the resin flow, he is part of the immense, slow respiration of the prehistoric world. He feels the dampness of the fern-covered floor and the immense weight of the sky before the Great Flood. This connection to deep time is what gives his work its soul. When he eventually wakes, he will not feel like a man who has merely spent a night carving stones. He will feel like a man who has returned from a long journey through the foundations of the earth. The scent of the resin on his skin is his passport, a permanent link between the fragile present of 1310 and the eternal golden past. As the sun finally dips below the dunes, the gold in the cabin fades into a rich, bruised purple. The heartstone in its box is no longer illuminated, but it holds on to a ghostly residual warmth from the day's light. Hermann stirs, a long, slow sigh escaping his lips as his internal clock begins to wind itself back up. The cycle of the merchant is nearing its restart. Soon he will reach for the flint and steel, the first spark will dance in the darkness, and the scent of the fire will once again mingle with the scent of the sunstone. But for these few precious minutes of twilight, he remains a king of shadows, resting in a palace of gold and timber, perfectly at peace with the coming night. The twilight deepens into a cold velvet blue, and the interior of the cabin becomes a kingdom of silhouettes. Hermann's eyes snap open, not with the jarred start of a frightened man, but with the steady, calibrated alertness of a predator or a master craftsman. He lies still for a long minute, letting his senses remap the room. He smells the cooling peat, the dry, dusty scent of the settled amber particles, and the sharp, metallic tang of the frozen night air beginning to seep through the door's threshold. His body feels heavy but recharged, the deep ache in his shoulders having settled into a dull, manageable throb. This is the moment of transition, the brief, silent bridge between the restorative darkness of sleep and the productive darkness of the workshop. He pushes back the heavy, bare furs, the cold air biting at his skin like a sharp-toothed animal. He moves with practiced efficiency, his bare feet finding the familiar, smoother patches of the floorboards as he makes his way to the hearth. He doesn't need a lamp. He knows the geometry of this room by touch and scent alone. He kneels before the ash-covered mound and uses a small iron spade to uncover the mother coal he buried earlier. It glows a fierce, defiant orange, a tiny fragment of the sun he kept captive through the day. He feeds it a handful of dry moss and a few shavings of cedar, leaning in close until the heat of the first flame kisses his face. As the fire catches, the shadows on the walls begin their nightly dance. Hermann stands and walks to the window, scraping a small circle through the thick frost with his thumb. Outside, the Baltic coast is a world of silver and ink. The moon has risen, a cold white eye reflected in the jagged mirrors of the ice floes. The wind is picking up, a low, mournful whistle that vibrates through the timber, but it no longer sounds like a threat. To Hermann, the wind is a companion. It is the force that stirs the sea, unearths the amber, and drives the world forward. He watches the shoreline for a moment, wondering what new treasures the tide is currently tumbling beneath the frozen sheets. He turns back to his workbench, the center of his universe. He picks up the wooden box and opens it, checking the rosary and the heartstone one last time in the flickering firelight. They look even more vital than they did in the sun. They seem to possess an internal, rhythmic light, as if they are breathing in sync with the fire. He closes the box and sets it aside. Today, it must be prepared for transport. He reaches for a piece of thick oiled leather and a heavy needle threaded with sinew. He will sew a custom pouch for these pieces, one that will protect them from the salt, the damp, and the prying eyes of less honest men during the journey to the trade hubs. The scent of the cabin is changing again, shifting from the stagnant sweetness of the day to the active, sharp aroma of a working space. The smell of the new cedar fire, The earthy musk of the oiled leather and the faint, persistent scent of the amber dust create a bracing atmosphere. Hermann feels the artisan's fever beginning to stir in his blood once more. There is no such thing as a finished task in the life of a master. There is only the next stone, the next polish, and the next discovery. He picks up a raw chunk of amber from the bucket, a large irregular mass that feels unusually heavy. As he turns it over in his hand, his thumb finds a smooth, transparent window in the crust. He freezes. Deep inside the stone, illuminated by the rising fire, is something he has never seen in 20 years of trade. A tiny, perfectly preserved lizard, its tail curled in an eternal golden spiral. Hermann's breath catches in his throat. This is not just a stone, it is a miracle. The scent of the resin seems to flare up in his nostrils, more intense than ever before, as if the stone itself is acknowledging its new guardian. He sets the lizard stone on a pedestal of light in the center of his bench. The night has only just begun, and the ancient forest has given him its greatest secret. He reaches for his finest scraper, his hand steady as a mountain, ready to peel back the layers of time once again. Hermann remains motionless, staring at the golden tomb of the lizard. The fire in the hearth crackles, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, but the merchant does not blink. In the 14th century, an inclusion of this magnitude is more than a curiosity. It is a relic of the old world, a piece of burning stone that could pay for a fleet of cogs or buy a man's way into the high councils of the Hanseatic League. He can feel the weight of the stone pressing into his palm, its surface still cold from the bucket but warming rapidly against his skin. The scent of the cabin seems to sharpen, the smoky cedar and the lingering lavender oil forming a halo around this new, prehistoric prize. He picks up his finest scraping knife, a tool with a blade no wider than a child's fingernail, forged from the highest quality Baltic steel. He does not begin with force, instead, he uses the edge to gently flick away the salt-crusted exterior near the lizard's head. Snap, snap. Tiny flakes of grey seaskin fall onto the workbench, sounding like dry autumn leaves. Beneath the crust, the amber is a deep, intoxicating cherry red, a colour so rare it is often reserved for the crowns of princes. As more of the stone is revealed, the internal clarity becomes staggering. The lizard is so perfectly preserved that Hermann can see the individual scales on its back and the tiny, delicate claws pressed against the resin as if it were still trying to climb a tree that turned to dust 50 million years ago. The atmosphere in the cabin is now thick with a reverent intensity. Hermann works with a precision that transcends mere craft. He is breathing softly, his exhalations timed to the rhythm of his strokes to ensure no moisture fogs the stone. The scent of the fresh amber shavings, the blood of the red stone, is different from the yellow varieties. It is deeper, more metallic, with an underlying musk that reminds him of damp earth after a summer storm. It is an intoxicating, heavy aroma that seems to fill the lungs and sharpen the vision. Every sense is tuned to the interface of steel and resin. One slip, one tremor of the hand, and the value of this miracle could be halved. Outside, the Baltic wind has risen to a steady, low-frequency thrum, vibrating the very foundations of the cabin. A light dusting of dry snow hits the window pane with the sound of thrown sand, but Hermann is insulated in his golden bubble. He reaches for a small vial of poppy seed oil and a tuft of unspun wool. He applies a single drop to the red stone and begins to buff a small window over the lizard's eye. As the polish takes hold, the eye of the creature seems to catch the firelight, flashing with a sudden eerie life. Hermann shivers for a fleeting second. The gap between 1310 and the dawn of time vanishes completely. He is looking into the eye of a creature that saw the world before man had a name. He sets the tool down, his fingers trembling slightly for the first time in years. He needs to steady his soul before he continues. He walks to the hearth and pours a small mug of spiced ale from the iron pot warming near the coals. The scent of cinnamon and cloves mingles with the pervasive amber musk, a domestic comfort that grounds him back in the present. He looks at the lizard stone sitting on his bench, glowing like a hot coal in the shadows. This stone will change everything. It is a gift from the sea, a reward for a lifetime of solitary labor in the cold and the dark. He returns to his stool, the warmth of the ale spreading through his chest. He picks up the needle and the leather for the pouch he was sewing earlier, but his eyes keep drifting back to the red amber. The night is deep, the fire is strong, and the master of the Baltic has been given a masterpiece to finish. He will not sleep again tonight. He will work until the sun returns to witness the liberation of the lizard, carving a legacy into the heart of the gold of the north that will outlast the very timber of his home. Herman sets the mug of spiced ale aside, the warmth of the cloves still tingling on his tongue. He returns to the lizard stone, his focus so absolute that the roaring wind outside becomes nothing more than a rhythmic hum. He chooses a medium-grained piece of shark skin to begin shaping the irregular edges of the red amber mass. The sound is a low, guttural rasp, 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 a more aggressive music than the whisper of the polishing cloth. As he works, a cloud of fine, reddish gold dust begins to rise, catching the firelight and hanging in the air like a shimmering nebula. The scent is overwhelming, a concentrated burst of ancient energy that tastes of iron and sun-scorched pine needles. The physical effort of shaping such a large, dense piece of resin causes a light sheen of sweat to break out on Herman's forehead. Despite the frost creeping across the floorboards, he stops every few minutes to blow the dust away from the window he has cleared. The lizard remains there frozen in its eternal scramble. With the rough edges removed, the stone begins to take on a more deliberate teardrop shape. The deep cherry red color is even more vibrant now, looking like a congealed drop of the earth's own blood. Herman marvels at how the light penetrates the stone. It doesn't just pass through, it seems to be captured, swirling around the lizard's body before reflecting back with a warm inner fire. The scent in the cabin has deepened into something almost visceral. The combination of the heated red amber, the drying shark skin, and the lingering aroma of the spiced ale creates a sensory profile that is uniquely masculine and ancient. It is the smell of a man wrestling with time itself. Herman feels a strange, calm power flowing through his fingers. He is no longer just a merchant preparing goods for a market. He is a sculptor refining a masterpiece. He knows that when he finally brings this piece to the guild masters in Danzig, the silence that will fall over the room will be more valuable than any pile of silver groschen. He transitions from the shark skin to a finer abrasive, a slurry made of crushed seashells and water. The sound shifts to a wet, rhythmic slosh shish, a cooling counterpoint to the heat generated by his friction. The water turns a milky pink as it carries away the microscopic particles of the red stone. Herman's movements are fluid and circular, a meditative dance that he has performed thousands of times, yet never on a stone of this importance. He is acutely aware of the lizard's fragile position within the resin. He must thin the walls of the amber enough to provide perfect visibility, but leave enough thickness to protect the inclusion from the stresses of temperature and time. Outside, the moon has reached its zenith, casting a stark, skeletal light over the Baltic ice. The world is a study in silence and cold, but inside the cabin the air is thick, warm, and alive with the smell of creation. Herman picks up a fresh piece of linen and wipes the slurry away, revealing the stone's true potential. The lizard's head is now visible in startling detail, the tiny lidless eye, the minute folds of skin around its neck, and even a single trapped air bubble that looks like a pearl hovering just above its snout. It is a sight that makes the merchant's heart hammer against his ribs. He reaches for his bowl of beeswax and the finest wool cloth, preparing for the final transformative polish. The night is at its most profound point, that hollow hour when the boundary between the living and the dead is said to be thinnest, but Herman feels no fear. He is in the presence of an ancient life, a tiny traveller from a world of giants and endless summer. He begins to buff the stone, the friction creating a high-pitched, melodic squeak that rings through the cabin like a bell. With every stroke, the cherry-red amber grows brighter, the lizard clearer, and the merchant's legacy more certain. He is no longer just Herman, he is the man who brought the red lizard back to the light. The high-pitched song of the wool against the red amber reaches a crescendo, a sharp, singing friction that seems to vibrate the very air of the cabin. Herman's arm moves in a blur of focused motion, his shoulder muscles burning with a familiar welcome fire. As the heat builds between the cloth and the resin, the scent of the cherry amber undergoes a final, miraculous transformation. The deep metallic musk gives way to a surprisingly sweet, balsamic fragrance, a scent that hasn't been smelled by any living creature since the Cretaceous period. It is thick, floral, and intoxicating, filling the merchant's lungs and making his head swim with a vision of a world where the sun never set and the trees reached for the stars. The lizard stone is now a blazing orb of crimson light in his hand. The final polish has removed every microscopic scratch, every ghost of a tool mark, leaving a surface so smooth it feels almost liquid. The lizard inside is no longer a mere inclusion, it has become the soul of the stone. Through the clarified cherry-red matrix, the creature's delicate anatomy is revealed in 3 dimensions. Herman can see the minute, fossilized cells of its skin and the subtle shift in color along its tail. It is a masterpiece of natural preservation, refined by human obsession. The merchant sets it down on a fresh square of white silk, and for a moment he simply breathes, his chest heaving as he watches the firelight play within the depths of the gem. The silence that follows the stopping of the work is heavy and profound. Outside, the Baltic wind has dropped to a mere whisper, as if the earth itself is pausing to acknowledge the beauty sitting on the workbench. The cabin is filled with the cooling scent of the beeswax and the fading, spicy ghost of the red resin. Herman looks at his tools, the shark skin, the steel scrapers, the silk rags, and feels a deep sense of gratitude. They are humble things made of wood and metal and bone, yet they have allowed him to reach across 50 million years to touch the prehistoric. He is a man of the 14th century, a time of plague and cold, yet in this moment he feels like a titan. He reaches for the leather pouch he began earlier, his needle moving with renewed purpose. He must finish the transport casing now, while the energy of the work is still in his blood. He sews a secret inner pocket into the heavy oiled leather, a hidden chamber specifically for the lizard stone. The heart stone and the rosary will be his public trade, but this red miracle will be his insurance, his legacy, perhaps his ticket to a life far away from the freezing dunes. As he pulls the final stitch tight, the scent of the oiled leather mingles with the lingering sweetness of the amber, creating an aroma of permanence and security. As the first faint grey light of another dawn begins to bleach the stars, Herman gathers the tiny shavings of red amber, the dust of the lizard, into a small glass vial. Even this dust is precious, a potent medicine and a pigment for the finest illuminators in the south. He sweeps the workbench clean, his movements slow and reverent. The night's work has been the most significant of his life, and the exhaustion that is beginning to settle over him is not a burden but a crown. He has pulled a dragon from the sea, a tiny golden dragon that will outlive him by another 1,000,000 years. He banks the fire one last time, the orange glow retreating into the grey ash. He walks to the window and looks out at the pale, frozen horizon. The world is waking up, but the merchant is ready for his rest. He tucks the leather pouch beneath his pillow, the weight of the stones a comforting presence against his head. As he closes his eyes, the scent of the red amber is the last thing he knows, a sweet ancient promise that even in the darkest winter, the light of the past can be found, polished and carried into the future. The master of the Baltic sleeps, and in his dreams the red lizard finally begins to move, climbing the golden trees of a sun-drenched eternal forest. The transition from the intense heat of creation to the cooling stillness of the post-work cabin is a slow sensory descent. Herman lies in the grey dawn, his ears ringing with the phantom song of the friction-heated resin. The air around his bed is a complex tapestry of scents. The heavy animal musk of the bear furs, the drying salt on his boots, and the dominant ethereal sweetness of the dust of the lizard that still clings to his beard and eyelashes. Even with his eyes shut, he can see the cherry-red glow of the stone through the leather of the pouch. It is a physical weight, a gravity of history that seems to pull his very soul deep into the mattress, away from the biting cold of the 14th century. The silence of the room is now absolute, a heavy blanket that even the creaking of the frost-heavy timber cannot pierce. But for the merchant, this silence is filled with the olfactory memory of the night. He can still taste the metallic tang of the shark skin on the back of his throat and feel the floral, balsamic weight of the red amber in his lungs. This is the artisan's afterglow, a state where the senses remain heightened even as the body surrenders to fatigue. He realizes that he will never look at a piece of yellow amber the same way again. The red lizard has raised the stakes of his life. He is no longer just a man who trades in sea gold. He is the guardian of a prehistoric ghost. As the sun begins to climb, a single ray of light finds a gap in the heavy window shutter, piercing the gloom of the cabin like a golden spear. It hits the workbench, illuminating the microscopic flecks of red dust that Herman missed with his brush. These tiny particles flare up like embers, casting a faint, rose-colored light onto the ceiling. To a passerby, the cabin would look like a simple fisherman's hut, weathered and insignificant against the vastness of the dunes. But inside, the air is saturated with the wealth of empires and the breath of lost worlds. The scent of the resin, now cold and stable, has become a permanent part of the wood, ensuring that even when Herman is long gone, this room will always smell of the ancient sun. Outside, the first signs of the morning trade begin to manifest. The distant rhythmic clop-clop of a pack pony on the frozen road, and the muffled shout of a neighbor checking their nets echo through the dunes. Herman hears these sounds as if from another world. They belong to the realm of the living, the realm of hunger and commerce. He, however, is still drifting in the realm of the timeless. He feels the cool, smooth surface of the leather pouch under his head, protecting the lizard stone. The transition from the 1300s to the prehistoric era has left him in a state of grace, a quietude that no market-day chaos could ever disturb. The merchant's breathing becomes long and steady, a slow bellows that draws in the last remaining warmth of the hearth. He is drifting toward a dream of fire, not the fire of his stove, but the fire of a young world, where the red resin flowed like honey and the air was thick with the scent of flowering ferns. In his mind, he sees the lizard blink, its lidless eye reflecting a sky that had never seen a human face. Herman smiles in his sleep, a faint, weary expression of triumph. He has done more than carve a stone. He has captured a heartbeat. The master of the Baltic is finally at rest, wrapped in the scent of eternity and the golden warmth of his own success. Herman sinks into a profound slumber as the morning sun bleaches the rolling dunes outside. The cabin has transformed into a silent time capsule where the molecular remnants of a night's intense labor are slowly settling. The scent of the red amber, thick and sweet like forest honey compressed over millions of years, now blends with the smoky pine aroma of the timber walls. It is a heavy atmosphere, carrying the breath of a distant epoch, cocooning the artisan in a protective layer. Even in sleep, Herman's senses register the presence of the gem beneath his head. Its scent is clean, dry, and authoritative. In his dreams, he no longer sees the cramped streets of Danzig or dry commercial contracts. He finds himself standing in a primordial forest flooded with light where colossal trees reach for golden clouds. Resin flows over the rugged bark like cascades of liquid sun, releasing a fragrance so potent it borders on intoxicating. The small red lizard skitters across his hand, its scales shimmering like pomegranate seeds under a prehistoric sun. The warmth of this vision bleeds into reality, soothing Herman's rough hands cracked by sea salt and the night's fine cuts, granting him a miraculous recovery. Outside, the howling north wind has softened into a low whistle through the thatch, replaced by the faint crackle of thin ice melting under the weak winter sun. A few amber gatherers pass by the cabin, nets slung over shoulders and heads bowed against the chill, entirely unaware of the priceless treasure resting behind the weathered planks. Herman's workshop is no longer just a shelter. It is a sanctuary of memory where the scents of the past are preserved in their purest form. Every speck of red dust remaining on the workbench stands as a witness to human persistence against the cruelty of time. Herman shifts slightly, his hand instinctively brushing against the oiled leather of the protective pouch. The cool, firm texture of the hide brings a sense of security even in the depths of sleep. He knows that upon waking, his life will have entered a new chapter. The red amber containing the lizard's soul is more than a commodity. It is a promise of eternity. Its scent will follow him, clinging to his clothes and skin like an indelible mark of a master who has touched the miraculous. As the sun reaches its zenith, dappled light pierces the shutter gaps, dancing on the floorboards covered in golden dust. The room retains a strange warmth thanks to the insulation of moss and clay. Herman sleeps on, his breath slow and rhythmic like the distant tide. In that profound stillness, only the scent of the red amber remains alive, spreading silently but powerfully, turning every second of the artisan's rest into a journey through space and time. The night of labor has ended, but the saga of the stone and the man has only just begun to be etched into the annals of the Baltic. The shadows begin to stretch once more as the afternoon wanes, casting long skeletal fingers across the workshop floor. Herman's awakening is gradual, a slow surfacing from the golden depths of his prehistoric dreams. The first thing to greet him is not the light, but the scent. The heavy resinous perfume of the red amber has reached a state of perfect equilibrium with the cold, wintry air of the cabin. It is a smell that feels structural, as if the very oxygen has been reinforced by the essence of the fossilized sun. He remains still for a moment, listening to the house settle, his fingers tracing the outline of the leather pouch through the furs. The weight of the lizard stone is a grounding reality that confirms the night's miracle was no fever dream. He rises and moves to the hearth, stoking the embers back to life. The warmth spreads, and with it the aromatic profile of the room reactivates. The dry, herbal scent of the hanging sage and rosemary mingles with the sweet, balsamic notes of the amber dust, creating a bracing, medicinal atmosphere that clears the last of his sleep. Herman begins the second vigil, not the work of carving, but the work of preparation. He takes a small iron-bound chest and lines it with thick layers of salt-dried seagrass. This will be the outer armor for the leather pouch, a defense against the damp hull of a ship or the humid air of a roadside inn. The physical environment of the 14th century is harsh, yet Herman's internal world is illuminated by the clarity of his craft. As he packs his few belongings, his movements are deliberate and rhythmic. He picks up a small piece of dark beeswax and rubs it into the seams of the leather pouch, the friction releasing a scent of summer meadows that provides a brief, sensory escape from the Baltic ice. This layer of wax will seal in the amber's spirit, ensuring that the lizard stone arrives in the south with its luster undimmed. Every step of this process is a ritual of protection, a merchant's prayer whispered in the language of materials. He pauses to look at the workbench, now bathed in the bruised purple light of the approaching dusk. The tools sit in their designated places, silent and expectant. He decides to leave a single small bead of yellow amber in the center of the table, a traditional offering to the spirit of the coast for the safe passage he is about to undertake. The scent of the room at this hour is one of transition. The heavy, creative energy of the previous night has been replaced by a lean, purposeful tension. He is no longer a craftsman in hiding. He is a traveler carrying a secret that could reshape his destiny. Outside, the first star of the evening, the mariner's light appears over the jagged horizon of the sea. The wind has turned sharp and crystalline, carrying the scent of deep water ice and distant salt flats. Herman dons his heavy wool cloak, the fabric having absorbed years of pine smoke and resin, turning him into a walking extension of his workshop. He takes a final breath of the cabin's air, committing the scent of the red amber to memory. It is a fragrance of triumph, a golden anchor that he will carry with him through the storms and markets of the world. He steps out into the cold, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving the silent sanctuary to wait for his return, while the red lizard rests in the darkness of its leather womb, ready for the long road ahead. The crunch of the frozen sand beneath Herman's heavy boots is the only sound in the vast twilight stillness of the shoreline. The air out here is a violent contrast to the cabin. It is sharp, ozone-heavy, and stripped of all sweetness. It tastes of brine and ancient ice. Yet, as the wind whips around his face, Herman can still catch the phantom scent of the red amber clinging to the fibers of his wool scarf. It is a warm, resinous ghost that refuses to be blown away, a private tether to the sanctuary he just left. He adjusts the weight of the iron-bound chest beneath his arm, feeling the solid, silent presence of the lizard stone within. It is no longer just a gem, it is a passenger, an ancient soul he is ferrying across a modern, dangerous world. He reaches the small stone pier where a shallow draft boat waits, its hull groaning against the ice-crusted pilings. The boatman, a silent figure wrapped in salt-stiffened furs, nods as Herman approaches. There is no conversation in this part of the world. Silence is a form of survival. As Herman steps onto the deck, the scent of the boat greets him, old tar, wet hemp, and the cold, fishy musk of the Baltic. It is a raw, honest smell, devoid of the artifice and beauty of his workshop. He finds a sheltered spot near the mast and settles in, placing the chest firmly between his feet. The journey to the trading cogs at the mouth of the Vistula has begun. As the boat pushes off, the cabin disappears into the grey blur of the dunes. Herman watches the flickering light of his neighbour's hearth fire fade until it is just another star on the horizon. The motion of the water is rhythmic and heavy, a slow swaying that mirrors the deep time he encountered within the stone. He reaches inside his cloak to touch the outer leather of the chest. The cold has already seeped into the iron fittings, but his mind remains focused on the warmth of the cherry-red interior. He thinks of the merchant guilds in the south, the spice-laden air of the Mediterranean ports, and the stone-walled cathedrals where his rosary might one day hang. But mostly, he thinks of the lizard, still and perfect in its golden tomb. The scent of the open sea begins to dominate, a bracing, expansive aroma of kelp and deep-tide minerals. It is a cleansing scent, washing away the resin fever of the night and replacing it with the lean, hungry energy of the road. Herman feels a strange sense of liberation. He has fulfilled his duty to the craft. He has liberated the beauty from the crust. Now his duty is to the survival of the masterpiece. He closes his eyes against the spray, the salt stinging his cheeks, and inhales the cold. Beneath the brine, he can still find that faint, balsamic sweetness of the amber, a secret compass pointing toward his future. The night deepens, and the boat glides through the black water like a shadow above. The Milky Way is a river of light that mimics the golden dust on Herman's workbench. He is a small man on a small boat in a vast, indifferent sea, yet he carries a piece of the sun in his pocket. The transition from artisan to traveller is complete. The scents of the workshop, the wax, the lavender, the linseed, and the ancient sap are now memories, stored away like the stones themselves. He leans his head against the wooden mast, the vibration of the sea humming through his bones, and prepares for the many miles of salt and wind that lie between him and the glory of the southern markets. The boat reaches the mouth of the Vistula as the moon hangs like a pale silver coin over the masts of the great Hanseatic cogs. Here the scent of the world changes abruptly. The clean, lonely brine of the open Baltic is overwhelmed by the heavy industrial aroma of a medieval port in motion. There is the smell of wet grain, the pungent tang of salted herring in thousands of barrels, and the thick, suffocating odor of hot pitch being applied to ship hulls. Herman stands on the rocking deck, his nostrils flaring. To anyone else, this would be a chaotic assault on the senses, but to him it is the smell of opportunity. It is the scent of the world coming to meet him, eager to trade silver and spice for the gold of the north. He disembarks with the iron-bound chest held tight against his ribs. Every jostle from a passing sailor or a soot-covered porter makes him tighten his grip. He navigates the muddy, ice-slicked wharves, moving toward a specific inn favoured by the amber merchants, the Amber Griffin. As he pushes through the heavy oak door, a wall of warmth and noise hits him. The air inside is thick with the smell of roasting pork, spilled ale, and the sharp, acrid smoke of cheap tallow candles. It is a far cry from the refined, balsamic atmosphere of his cabin. Yet even here, the merchant maintains his inner sanctuary. He finds a dark corner, orders a bowl of hot pottage, and lets the steam rise into his face, masking the tavern's grime with the simple scent of leeks and peppercorns. As he eats, he feels the eyes of other men on him. The amber trade is a world of whispers and shadows. He knows that rumours of a red stone would spread through this port like a grease fire. He keeps his gaze lowered, his fingers tracing the cold iron of the chest's lock. The scent of the leather pouch inside, that secret mix of beeswax and ancient resin, remains his only comfort. It is a private signal, a reminder that while he sits in a room full of noise and common smells, he carries a fragment of the sublime. He is a man between worlds, the gritty, salt-stained reality of 1310 and the eternal golden silence of the lizard's tomb. Later that night, in a small rented room above the stable, Herman performs a final check. He ensures the door is bolted and the shutters are latched against the damp river fog. He opens the chest just an inch. The scent of the red amber, concentrated by the confinement of the leather and wood, spills out like a physical force. It is floral, deep and impossibly sweet, momentarily erasing the smell of hay and horse sweat from the room. He looks at the heart stone and the lizard stone, glowing faintly in the dim light of his single candle. They have survived the first leg of the journey. The transition from the isolation of the dunes to the complexity of the city has begun. He lies down on the straw mattress, his cloak still wrapped around him. The muffled sounds of the port, the clanking of anchor chains, the distant shouts of the night watch lull him into a state of weary rest. He is a merchant on the verge of a legend. Tomorrow he will enter the guild halls, and the scent of his labor will finally meet the noses of the powerful. But for now he simply breathes in the lingering sweetness on his own skin. He is the guardian of the sun, resting in a world of shadow, waiting for the dawn to turn his red gold into a legacy that will never fade. The morning bell of the cathedral tolls through the fog, a heavy bronze sound that vibrates the floorboards of the inn. Herman wakes instantly, his hand already clamped onto the iron-bound chest. The air in the small room is damp and chilled, smelling of stale straw and the faint sulphurous tang of the coal fires burning in the harbour below. He rises, moving with the economy of a man who has no time for hesitation. Today is the day of the appraisal. He washes his face with freezing water from a ceramic basin, the cold shocking his system and sharpening his focus. As he dries his hands, he notices that his fingertips still carry a slight, translucent amber tint, a permanent stain of his craft that no amount of scrubbing can remove. He dresses in his finest tunic of dark, heavy wool, a garment that has been stored in a cedar trunk to keep it free of moths. It carries a scent of sharp evergreen, a professional and grounding aroma that contrasts with the sweet, ethereal perfume of the stones. He places the leather pouch inside the hidden breast pocket of the tunic, feeling the solid, reassuring weight of the lizard stone against his heart. The heart stone and the rosary remain in the chest, acting as his formal introduction to the guild. He is ready. He is no longer just a hermit of the dunes. He is a senior strategist of his own fate, walking into the lion's den of the Hanseatic elite. The walk to the guild hall takes him through the great market, a sensory gauntlet of medieval commerce. He passes stalls overflowing with bundles of dried cinnamon and sacks of peppercorns from the east, their heat-filled scents clashing with the cold, metallic smell of the ironmonger's displays. The air is a thick soup of wood smoke, roasted nuts, and the damp wool of 1,000 bustling bodies. Herman maneuvers through the crowd like a ghost, his eyes fixed on the limestone spires of the hall. He inhales deeply, filtering the chaos of the market through the memory of his workshop. The scent of the red amber is his internal compass, keeping him steady amidst the swirling distractions of the city. At the entrance of the guild hall, 2 guards in polished breastplates flank the massive oak doors. The air here smells of authority, old parchment, floor wax, and the cold mineral scent of stone that has stood for centuries. Herman presents his credentials, a wax-sealed scroll from the coastal elders. The guards usher him into the great chamber, a room of soaring arches and stained glass. The atmosphere is quiet and reverent, smelling of expensive tallow and the faint, dry dust of ledgers. In the center of the room, seated behind a table of dark, polished mahogany, are the 3 masters of the Amber Guild, their robes trimmed with the silver fox fur of the high north. Herman approaches, the rhythmic thud of his boots echoing in the vast space. He places the iron-bound chest on the table. The masters look at him with practiced indifference, their eyes flicking from his weathered face to the humble exterior of the box. Herman says nothing. He reaches out and unlatches the lock, the metallic click sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. As he lifts the lid, The concentrated scent of the heartstone and the rosary spills out, a sudden floral burst of Baltic summer that cuts through the stagnant air of the hall. One of the masters leans forward, his nostrils flaring in involuntary surprise. The scent is the first proof of the quality. It is the fragrance of a master's touch, undeniable and pure, but Hermann knows that the true shock, the red miracle against his chest, is yet to come. The eldest guild master, a man whose skin resembles the very parchment he signs, reaches out with gloved fingers to lift the heartstone. As the golden sphere catches the light of the high-vaulted windows, the room seems to grow warmer. The scent of the honeyed resin, released from its confinement, fills the immediate air, a clean, sunny fragrance that reminds the masters of the vast open horizons of the coast. They murmur in low, gravelly tones, their eyes narrowing as they inspect the clarity of the yellow amber and the precision of Hermann's facets. "Fine work, Master Hermann," the elder says, his voice like dry leaves. "Your reputation for the sea gold is well earned. The rosary alone would fetch a king's ransom in the southern courts." Hermann remains standing, his expression a mask of stone. He feels the lizard stone resting in the hidden pocket against his chest, its warmth seeming to pulse with every beat of his heart. He knows that the yellow stones, as perfect as they are merely the opening act. He waits for the precise moment when the masters begin to pull their ledgers forward to record the trade. "There is one more thing," Hermann says, his voice low and steady, cutting through the scratching of their quills. The air in the chamber suddenly feels charged, as if a storm is brewing just outside the stained glass. He reaches into his tunic and withdraws the small, custom-sewn leather pouch. He doesn't open it immediately, he holds it in his palm, letting the heat of his hand reactivate the beeswax seal. The scent of the lavender and the deep, balsamic undertones of the red resin begin to leak through the stitches, a fragrance so exotic and powerful that the guild masters stop their writing entirely. They look up, their professional indifference replaced by a primal predatory curiosity. Hermann slowly unpicks the final seam and lets the cherry-red stone roll onto the dark mahogany table. A collective gasp escapes the masters. The lizard stone doesn't just sit there, it seems to glow with an internal subterranean fire. In the dim, cavernous hall, the stone looks like a fallen star made of blood. The scent that follows is absolute, a concentrated floral explosion of ancient earth and prehistoric sun. It is a smell that transcends the 14th century, a scent that speaks of a time before the guild, before the cathedral, and before the laws of men. The red lizard, perfectly suspended in its crimson tomb, stares back at the masters with its lidless golden eye. The silence that follows is so thick that the flickering of the candles sounds like thunder. "Merciful Mother," the youngest master whispers, his hand trembling as he reaches for a magnifying lens. He doesn't touch the stone, he doesn't dare, he simply hovers over it, breathing in the intoxicating balsamic aroma that has now completely dominated the scent of the old stone hall. The dry dust and the smell of parchment have been obliterated by the gold of the north. Hermann watches them, his arms crossed over his chest. He sees the greed, the awe, and the reverence warring on their faces. In this moment, the merchant from the dunes has become the most powerful man in the city. The scent of his success is no longer a dream, it is a reality that has brought the masters of the world to their knees. The eldest master removes his spectacles, his eyes watering whether from the intensity of the amber's scent or the sheer value of the specimen. Hermann cannot be sure. The air in the great chamber has reached a point of sensory saturation. The usual smell of old limestone and stale incense has been replaced by the vibrant, primordial musk of the red lizard. It is a scent that feels heavy, like the air before a great summer deluge, thick with the aroma of fossilized sap and ancient crushed flowers. The masters lean in, their silver fox furs brushing against the mahogany, forming a tight circle of avarice and awe around the cherry-red miracle. "This is not a stone," the elder master whispers, his voice cracking with a sudden uncharacteristic vulnerability. "This is a fragment of the first morning." He looks up at Hermann, his gaze sharp and reassessing. He no longer sees a weather-beaten merchant from the dunes. He sees a man who has successfully bartered with the secrets of the earth. The scent of the red amber seems to have stripped away the layers of bureaucratic formality, leaving only the raw human response to something truly extraordinary. One of the masters instinctively reaches for a quill to calculate its worth, then stops, realizing that there is no standard currency for a ghost trapped in blood-colored glass. Herman feels a strange, cold calm settling over him. The intense artisan's fever that drove him through the long freezing night in his cabin has crystallized into a diamond-hard clarity. He realizes that the power dynamic in the room has shifted permanently. The scent of the resin, clinging to his own skin and clothes, acts as a protective aura, a reminder that he is the one who understands the stone's language. He watches as the masters debate in hushed, urgent tones, mentioning names of emperors, high bishops, and the grand masters of the Teutonic Knights. The lizard stone is no longer an object, it is a political force, a scent that will soon drift through the most powerful corridors of Europe. He reaches forward and, with a slow, deliberate motion, places a square of white silk over the stone. The sudden disappearance of the red glow is jarring, like a candle being snuffed out in a dark cave. The concentrated scent remains, but the visual spell is broken. "I did not come to Danzig to sell a curiosity," Herman says, his voice echoing with a new commanding resonance. "I came to establish a legacy." The scent of the room seems to settle at his words, the balsamic sweetness of the amber grounding the room's nervous energy. He is proposing more than a trade. He is proposing a partnership that will secure his place in the annals of the guild forever. The eldest master nods slowly, a silent acknowledgement of Herman's terms. The scent of the chamber begins to transition once more, shifting from the raw, intoxicating aroma of discovery to the dry, metallic smell of an impending agreement. Outside, the bells of the cathedral begin to toll for the noon hour, their heavy bronze vibrations matching the steady thrum of Herman's heart. He has brought the sun from the sea into the heart of the city, and as he gathers the silk-wrapped stone back into his hand, he knows that the world will never smell the same to him again. The red lizard is quiet, but its presence is a golden roar that will echo through the centuries. The negotiation moves to the inner sanctum of the guild hall, a smaller, circular room where the air is even more stagnant, smelling of cold ash and heavy centuries-old tapestries. Here, the scent of the red amber is amplified, bouncing off the low stone ceiling until it feels like a physical presence sitting at the table. Herman watches as the masters produce a contract of exclusivity and perpetual lineage. This document will not only pay him in gold florins, but will grant his family a seat in the Great Council and ensure that the Lizard of the Baltic remains the centerpiece of the guild's treasury. The scent of the fresh ink, sharp and vinegary, cuts through the amber's sweetness, marking the transition from art to law. Herman dips the quill into the inkwell, the metallic scent of the nib reminding him of the steel scrapers he used in his lonely cabin. As he signs his name, a single drop of ink falls onto the parchment, smelling of oak gall and iron. It is the final seal on a journey that began with a storm-tossed piece of sea crust on a frozen beach. He feels a sudden, sharp pang of nostalgia for the isolation of the dunes, the smell of the salt spray, the roar of the wind, and the humble scent of his banked peat fire. He has traded his solitude for status, his quiet workshop for the noisy halls of power. The eldest master takes the signed parchment, blowing on the ink to dry it. "It is done," he says, and for the first time he smiles, a thin, dry expression that carries the scent of old peppermint. He summons a page to bring a celebratory vintage, a heavy, dark wine from the Rhine that smells of blackberries and damp earth. As the wine is poured into silver chalices, the fruity, fermented aroma mingles with the lingering balsamic ghost of the amber. It is a sophisticated, complex scent, the smell of a successful civilization built on the spoils of a prehistoric world. Herman raises his glass, the silver cool against his lips, but his eyes remain fixed on the silk-wrapped bundle on the table. Outside the sanctum, the sounds of the city have reached a fever pitch. The distant roar of the market, the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, and the rhythmic chanting of monks from the nearby monastery all blend into a singular, vibrating hum. But inside the room, the scent of the red amber remains the dominant force, a silent golden anchor in the middle of the medieval chaos. Herman realizes that he has not just sold a stone, he has infused the very history of this city with the fragrance of his labor. Every time a master walks through this hall, they will catch a faint, ghostly hint of the lizard's breath and remember the man from the coast. He stands to leave, the iron-bound chest now empty but his heart and pockets full. He leaves the lizard stone with the masters, watched over by guards whose hands tremble at the proximity of such a relic. As Herman walks out of the guild hall and back into the cold, foggy streets of Danzig, the smell of the port, the fish, the tar, the smoke, hits him with a new intensity, but it no longer bothers him. He carries the scent of the red amber in his soul, a permanent internal flame that will keep him warm through all the winters to come. He is the master of the Baltic, and the world is finally breathing in the gold he found in the dark. Herman walks through the narrow, gabled streets of Danzig, his heavy cloak billowing in the biting wind. The city's scent, a chaotic mix of damp stone, horse manure, and the omnipresent charcoal smoke, feels distant and thin compared to the olfactory titan he left behind in the guild's vaults. Even though the lizard stone is no longer in his physical possession, his skin remains a living map of his labor. The scent of the red amber has permeated his very pores. It emanates from his hair, his beard, and the fibers of his wool tunic. To the common folk he passes, the flower girls smelling of wilted stems and the chimney sweeps smelling of soot, he must seem like a man who has stepped directly out of a sunlit myth. He finds himself drawn back to the harbour, the place where the world arrives and departs. He stands at the edge of the quay, watching the great cogs strain against their moorings. The air here is a thick, wet slurry of salt, rotting kelp, and the metallic tang of the cold Vistula River. He breathes it in deeply, letting the harshness of the port ground him. He realizes that while he has gained a seat at the tables of the powerful, his true home is the interface between the land and the sea. The scent of the amber was a gift from the deep, and as he looks out toward the grey horizon of the Baltic, he feels a profound sense of closure. The dragon of the dunes has been returned to the world of men. He stops at a small apothecary's shop near the waterfront, the interior smelling of dried valerian, crushed beetles, and pungent vinegar. He purchases a small silver-stoppered vial and fills it with the last of the red amber dust he carried from his cabin, the dust of the lizard. As he seals the vial, the tiny concentrated cloud of resinous sweetness momentarily conquers the apothecary's medicinal gloom. This is his final souvenir, a scent memory that he will keep close to his chest, a reminder of the night he wrestled with 50 million years of history. As evening falls, the cathedral bells begin their slow rhythmic tolling for vespers. The scent of the city shifts again, the heavy kitchen smells of roasting fat and boiled cabbage rising to meet the descending fog. Sherman turns away from the harbour and begins the walk back to the Amber Griffin Inn. He moves with a lightness he hasn't felt in years. The transition from the desperate, lonely artisan to the legendary guild partner is complete. He knows that in the morning, the story of the red lizard will be on every merchant's tongue, a fragrance of wealth and wonder that will drift from the taverns to the palaces. He enters his small room above the stable, the air smelling of dry hay and the cooling sweat of the horses below. He doesn't light a candle. He sits in the darkness, listening to the muffled sounds of the port and the distant lonely cry of a seagull. He opens the silver vial for a fleeting second, letting one final floral pulse of the red amber fill the room. He closes his eyes and, for the first time since the storm that unearthed the stone, his mind is perfectly still. The master of the Baltic is no longer chasing the sun. He has captured it, shared it, and now, in the cooling scent of the night, he finally belongs to himself. Part 41. The following morning, the dawn breaks not with gold, but with a heavy leaden mist that smells of wet iron and river silt. Herman wakes to a rhythmic pounding on his door, not the aggressive strike of a creditor, but the measured, authoritative knock of the guild's couriers. As he opens the door, the sharp, cold draught from the hallway carries the scent of damp wool and the faint metallic tang of the silver florins they have brought in a heavy reinforced chest. The courier, a young man whose eyes are wide with the kind of awe usually reserved for saints, hands him a scroll sealed with the guild's crest in deep crimson wax. The scent of the wax when Herman breaks it is a familiar, comforting note of pine and cinnabar, the final olfactory signature of his new reality. He settles his accounts at the inn, the smell of the common room, stale ale and wood ash now feeling like a skin he is ready to shed. He steps out into the street, and for the first time he hears his own name whispered in the fog. The story of the red lizard has travelled faster than the scent of a spice ship. People pull back to let him pass, their nostrils twitching as they catch the lingering balsamic aura that follows him. He doesn't head for the palaces or the high markets. Instead, he walks toward the shipyards, his boots clicking with a steady, purposeful rhythm on the slick cobblestones. He smells the raw timber of new hulls, fresh oak and pungent pine, and realizes he is looking for a vessel to take him back to the coast. He finds a sturdy, broad-beamed knarr, its deck smelling of clean salt and seasoned wood. He strikes a bargain with the captain, not with the desperation of a labourer, but with the quiet confidence of a man who could buy the ship's entire cargo with a single gesture. As he settles into the small aft cabin, the scent of the sea salt begins to wash away the cloying, heavy perfumes of the city. He opens his small silver vial one last time, allowing the sweet floral ghost of the red amber to mingle with the bracing brine of the harbour. It is a perfect olfactory harmony, the ancient sun meeting the eternal sea. As the knarr clears the harbour walls and the sails catch the north wind, the noise of Danzig fades into a dull grey hum. The air becomes sharper, colder, and infinitely more honest. Herman stands at the rail, his face turned toward the spray. He thinks of his lonely cabin in the dunes, the smell of the banked peat fire, and the silent, golden hours of the night. He is returning not as the man who left, but as a legend. Yet he finds that his greatest desire is simply to sit in the stillness of his workshop once more, surrounded by the scent of unworked resin and the promise of the next storm. The sun finally pierces the mist, turning the white caps into flashes of brilliant light. The scent of the open Baltic, vast, cold, and smelling of deep-water minerals fills his lungs, erasing the last traces of the Guildhall's stagnant dust. He reaches into his cloak and touches the silver vial, the metal cool against his skin. The red lizard is gone, resting in a velvet-lined box for the eyes of kings, but its essence remains within him. Herman watches the horizon, where the line between the sky and the water blurs into a single shimmering thread of gold. He is a master of time, a guardian of the prehistoric, and a sailor heading home through a world that finally smells of freedom. The knarr cuts through the choppy waves of the Baltic, the rhythmic slap hiss of the hull against the water acting as a heartbeat for the journey. As the ship moves further north, the air undergoes a crystalline purification. The heavy, fermented smells of Danzig's tanneries and breweries are replaced by a scent that is thin, cold, and electric, the smell of the high latitudes. Herman stands on the deck, his lungs expanding with the bracing chill. He notices that the other sailors give him a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a superstitious reverence. To them he carries the scent of the deep, a lingering ambergris-like sweetness that seems to defy the biting salt spray. By mid-afternoon, the familiar silhouette of the dunes begins to rise from the leaden sea like the backs of sleeping giants. The scent of home reaches him before the sight does, the dry, toasted aroma of sun-bleached seagrass and the sharp, resinous tang of the scrub pines that cling to the sandy soil. It is a humble, earthy fragrance, yet to Herman's refined senses, it is more welcoming than all the incense in the cathedral. He feels the tension in his shoulders carried since the night of the carving finally begin to dissolve. The transition from the golden merchant back to the man of the coast is starting with every breath of land air he takes. He is rowed ashore in a small skiff, the oars creaking in a familiar wooden rhythm. As his boots hit the wet sand of his own beach, a profound silence envelops him. The shoreline smells of cold tide pools, crushed seashells, and the faint sulphurous hint of decaying kelp, the raw materials of his existence. He walks toward his cabin, which looks smaller and more weathered than he remembered. He pushes open the heavy door, and the air that greets him is stagnant but holy. It smells of his last banked fire, the dry herbal dust of his rafters, and most poignantly the faint, lingering sweetness of the lizard's breath that still haunts the floorboards. He doesn't unpack his gold or his new silks. Instead, he moves straight to his workbench. He runs his hand over the scarred wood, feeling the grooves where he labored over the red stone. The scent of the linseed oil and the ghost of the amber dust are still there, embedded in the grain. He realizes that while the world now owns the masterpiece, he owns the memory of its creation. He takes the silver vial from his cloak and places it on the center of the table. He doesn't open it. He doesn't need to. The room itself is a living record of his triumph, an olfactory archive of the night he touched eternity. As the sun sets, casting long violet shadows over the dunes, Herman lights a single modest fire in the hearth. The smell of the peat smoke rises, grounding him in the present. He sits by the window watching the stars ignite over the Baltic. He is a wealthy man, a powerful man, and a man of legend. But as he inhales the simple, cold scent of the winter night, he finds his true reward is the quiet. The red lizard is a world away, glowing in a treasury, but the master is home, surrounded by the scent of the sea and the infinite possibilities of the next tide. A week has passed since Herman's return, and the isolation of the coast has begun to weave its quiet magic back into his soul. The heavy, gold-laden chest sits unopened in a corner, already gathering a fine layer of grey dust that smells of the earth. Herman has returned to his rhythm, but it is a rhythm transformed. He spends his mornings walking the shoreline after the tide recedes, his boots sinking into the wet, cold sand that smells of brine and crushed minerals. He is no longer looking for a fortune, he is looking for a connection. Every piece of yellow amber he finds, small translucent pebbles smelling of salt and ancient sun, is a greeting from the sea he once fought to conquer. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere has shifted from a place of frantic labor to one of contemplative mastery. The scent of the red amber has faded into a delicate, ghostly undertone, a faint floral whisper that only appears when the sun hits a certain patch of the floorboards. Herman has begun a new project, but not for the guild or the kings. He is carving a simple small figure of a gull from a piece of clear, honey-colored amber. The smell of the work is different now, less like a struggle and more like a conversation. The shavings fall to the floor, smelling of fresh pine and light, lacking the heavy balsamic intensity of the lizard stone. The winter air outside has turned crystalline, carrying the scent of the deep freeze from the far north. Inside, Herman's hearth fire burns steady, the peat smoke providing a warm, earthy bass note to the room's olfactory symphony. He has begun to keep a ledger, not of prices and weights, but of the scents of the tide. He records how the air smells before a storm, metallic and sharp, and how the amber smells when it first emerges from the kelp, briny and primordial. He is becoming a librarian of the invisible, a man who understands that the true value of his craft lies in the sensory bridge it builds between the human and the eternal. One evening, as the moon reflects off the frozen surf, a traveller knocks on his door, a young apprentice sent by the guild to learn the secret of the red glow. Herman invites him in, and the boy stands frozen, his nostrils flaring. He expects to find a palace of perfume. Instead, he finds a simple room that smells of wood smoke, sea salt, and a lingering, impossible sweetness that he cannot name. Herman doesn't show him the gold or the silver vial. Instead, he hands the boy a piece of raw, unpolished resin and a shark-skin scraper. "Don't look at the stone," Herman says, his voice a low rumble. "Listen to the scent. It will tell you where it came from." As the apprentice begins to work, the smell of fresh amber fills the cabin once more. Herman sits by the window, watching the young man struggle with the friction and the heat. He realizes that the legend of the red lizard will continue to grow, shifting and changing like the dunes themselves. But the truth of it, the heat of the wool, the scent of the prehistoric forest and the heartbeat of the stone, is something that can only be found in the quiet, salt-stained hours of the night. The master of the Baltic smiles, inhaling the cold, clean air of the present, content to be the silent guardian of a fragrance that changed the world. The apprentice works through the night, his breath hitching as the friction of the shark skin releases a sharp, citrusy aroma from the yellow stone. Herman watches from the shadows of his chair, the scent of the boy's nervous sweat mingling with the dry herbal fragrance of the cabin's rafters. It is a familiar scene, yet Herman views it with a detached, serene wisdom. He recognizes the resin fever in the boy's eyes, the same hunger he felt when the red lizard first winked at him from the crust. The air in the cabin begins to thicken, the smell of the yellow amber shavings building into a warm, toasted perfume that speaks of shallow seas and prehistoric summer. As the midnight hour passes, Herman rises and moves to the workbench. He doesn't take the tools, instead he opens the window just a crack. The sudden intrusion of the Baltic night, cold, ozone-heavy and smelling of deep-sea ice, shatters the cloying sweetness of the room. The apprentice shivers, his hands pausing. "The scent must breathe," Herman says softly. "If you trap it in the heat, you lose the soul of the stone. You must balance the fire of the hand with the ice of the sea." The boy nods, his nostrils twitching as he experiences the olfactory pivot, the moment when the raw smell of the material meets the purifying air of the world. Herman reaches into a hidden drawer and pulls out a small jar of aged walnut oil, which carries a deep, nutty, and slightly bitter scent. He demonstrates how to apply it to the stone to seal the fragrance, a technique that creates a sensory barrier. As the oil hits the warm amber, a new scent emerges, earthy, rich, and sophisticated. It is the smell of a finished object, a piece of the wild that has been tamed by human hands. The transition from the raw to the refined is complete in the air before it is even visible to the eye. The apprentice watches, mesmerized by how the master manipulates the very atmosphere of the room. Toward dawn, the apprentice falls into a light sleep over his stool, his head resting near his small, polished creation. Herman remains awake, a silent sentinel in the cooling room. He picks up the silver vial of lizard dust and holds it to the light of the dying embers. He realizes that he is no longer just a carver of stones, but a carver of legacies. The scent he released in Danzig will eventually fade from the nostrils of the masters, but here in this salt-stained hut, it has become the foundation of a new lineage. The air smells of continuity, of one generation's triumph becoming another's inspiration. The sun begins to bleed over the horizon, turning the grey Baltic into a sheet of hammered copper. The scent of the morning is crisp and neutral, a blank canvas for the day to come. Herman steps outside onto the dunes, the cold wind whipping his cloak. He inhales the brine, the pine, and the faint, permanent sweetness that lives in his skin. He is the bridge between the prehistoric forest and the medieval city, a man who found the scent of eternity in a piece of red glass. As the apprentice stirs inside, the master of the coast looks out at the infinite water, ready for whatever new fragrance the tide might bring. The apprentice departs by midday, carrying his small, polished gull and a head full of Herman's cryptic wisdom. As the boy's silhouette vanishes over the crest of the dunes, the cabin settles into a profound, ringing silence. The air is still charged with the remnants of the lesson, the sharp citrus of the yellow amber, and the nutty bitterness of the walnut oil. Herman moves through the space, performing a cleansing of the senses. He opens the door wide, letting the gale-force Baltic wind sweep through, dragging out the heavy perfumes of the morning and replacing them with the raw, metallic scent of a brewing winter storm. In this renewed clarity, Herman feels a pull toward his deepest storage, a heavy chest buried beneath the floorboards, away from the prying eyes of apprentices or guild couriers. He clears away the rime-covered sand and lifts the lid. Inside lie the unspeakables, pieces of amber so dark, so opaque, or so strangely shaped that they defy the standard categories of the market. He reaches for a large, irregular nodule that smells not of honey, but of damp earth and ancient lightning. It is black amber, a rare volcanic-looking variant that holds a scent of charred wood and deep ocean minerals. This is the stone of his twilight years, a material that requires no polishing, only understanding. He spends the afternoon sitting by the cold hearth, simply holding the black stone. He doesn't use a scraper or a file, he uses the heat of his palms to wake the scent. Gradually, a low, thrumming aroma begins to radiate from his hands, a scent of petrified smoke and the heavy, sulphurous breath of the earth's core. It is the polar opposite of the red lizard, where the lizard was light and life. This stone is shadow and time. The transition in the room is palpable. The cabin no longer feels like a sunlit workshop, but like a cave at the edge of the world. Herman closes his eyes, inhaling the dark, grounding fragrance, letting it anchor him against the growing roar of the wind outside. As the storm finally breaks, lashing the wooden walls with sleet and salt spray, the scent of the black amber reaches its peak. It is a protective, ancient smell that seems to reinforce the very structure of the hut. Herman realizes that his journey with the gold of the north has reached its final stage. He has moved from the commercial brilliance of the yellow stones, through the miraculous beauty of the red lizard, to the silent, stoic wisdom of the black earth. The room smells of a long life lived at the threshold of the unknown, a blend of wood smoke, sea salt, and the deep, dark perfume of a world that existed before man had a name for beauty. He leans back against his furs, the black stone still warm in his grip. The fire has long since gone out, but he doesn't feel the cold. The scent of the amber is his blanket, his history, and his quiet triumph. In the darkness of the Baltic night, with the sea screaming just yards away, the master of the dunes is at peace. He has translated the light of the prehistoric sun for the world of men, and now he is content to sit in the fragrant shadow of the stones, listening to the eternal breath of the tide. As the storm outside reaches a crescendo, the cabin no longer feels like a structure of wood and thatch, but a vessel suspended in the amber light of the prehistoric past. The black amber in Herman's hands begins to undergo its final transformation. Under the steady rhythmic heat of his palms, a heat born from decades of labor and a spirit finally at rest, the stone releases a super scent. This is not the mere aroma of resin. It is a sensory collapse of 50 million years into a single crystalline moment. The air in the cabin becomes viscerally thick, vibrating with a scent that defies the boundaries of the 14th century. It is a five-sense matrix of absolute completion: the heavy, sulphurous grit of the earth's core, the silk of the ancient floral balsams that once dripped from towering conifers, the heat of a sun that set before the first human breath, and the cold of the eternal Baltic ice. Herman inhales, and for the first time in his life, his lungs feel as though they are filled with liquid gold. He is no longer breathing the air of a dying winter. He is breathing the atmosphere of the world's first morning. In this profound state of atmospheric saturation, Herman performs his final strategic act. He doesn't reach for his tools to carve the black stone. Instead, he opens the small silver vial of the red lizard dust and pours it over the thrumming surface of the black nodule. The reaction is instantaneous. The bright, floral, balsamic sweetness of the red amber merges with the smoky mineral depth of the black. It is the grand synthesis, the marriage of the sun and the earth, of life and shadow. The room is flooded with a cherry-red radiance that pulses in time with the roaring tide outside. The scent is so powerful it acts as a biological anchor, locking Herman's consciousness into the very grain of the stone. He realizes that his masterpiece was never meant to be a physical object for a king's treasury or a guild's pedestal. His true masterpiece is the atmosphere he has created, a permanent, invisible legacy that will haunt these dunes for eternity. He has turned his life's work into a scent path, a golden vibration that will guide any weary traveler back to the truth of the prehistoric soul. As the first light of dawn pierces the storm clouds, turning the grey Baltic into a sheet of hammered copper, the cabin is filled with a ringing, holy silence. The villagers and the apprentice will later return to find the door standing wide open to the sea salt wind, but the master will be gone. There will be no body to bury, only a heavy, iron-bound chest filled with unspeakable stones and a workbench that glows with a faint internal warmth. The air in the hut will remain forever changed. A localized temporal sanctuary where the scent of red balsam and ancient smoke never fades, regardless of the season. Herman has achieved the ultimate zero-footprint transfiguration. He has dissolved his identity into the very air of the coast. He is now the brine in the spray, the resin in the pine, and the golden warmth in the evening light. He has moved beyond the limits of content and strategy to become the environment itself. The story of Sleepy History with Tales finds its anchor here in the quiet, fragrant shadow of the dunes. Herman's legacy proves that the most enduring stories are not those written in ink or carved in stone, but those breathed into the atmosphere. The lizard's breath remains a permanent signal in the north, a reminder that the light of the prehistoric sun is never truly lost. It merely waits for a master to release it. As the final notes of this sensory journey fade into the sound of the waves, we realize that we are all, in a sense, suspended in Herman's amber. We are the witnesses to a beauty that was once hidden, now made eternal through the power of a single perfect breath. The master is at rest, the stones are silent, and the world is finally beautifully golden.
Sleepy History with Wesley is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes.
The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source.
While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation.
Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study.
By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.